This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm just going to begin by giving a little shout out to a bump that is somewhere in Britain. I know not where, but the bump belongs to Heather, who's been in touch. So I want to let you know that I might have found your youngest listener. We were listening to your show on Catch Up last night, and my baby bump wouldn't stop moving whenever you were talking, and the moving stopped when you stopped talking. So there wasn't a lot of stopping then on the move with the baby, given that I very rarely stop talking. But I don't know why that one caught my eye this morning, but it really did. I need to own up to something. I'm afraid I'm in one of those moods. I'm in one of those moods where I can simultaneously worry that I don't understand anything and then also see patterns in almost everything. So the Mohammed Fayed story that has been burning all week as a consequence of a very impressive investigation by the BBC is not something that we've talked about. But it has been a presence in the back of my mind as I contemplate the news agenda. Keir Starmer heading off to America for the United Nations meetings, where him and David Lammy have both delivered really impressive speeches, although don't expect to get as much coverage in most of the UK media as borrowing a mate's flat for a few weeks. Well, his son was doing his GCSEs. I make of that what you will. And while he's there, he's meeting Donald Trump. And then, I don't know if you heard my learned colleague John Sopel on Nick's show earlier talking about his new book, splendidly titled new book, Strangeland, which draws on John's unique perspective, really, as somebody with a foot in both America and the United Kingdom as this curious period of recent history began to unfold. So what on earth could knit all of those things together? Particularly the Fayed angle. Well, when you think about it, it's possibly obvious. Donald Trump, of course, remains an adjudicated rapist and a self-confessed sex offender. It's so hard to keep track of which legal cases against him are still live, which are settled, which are likely to be banjaxed by the appalling decisions of a Supreme Court to which he made appointments designed chiefly to allow him to avoid justice, or at least to avoid scrutiny for crimes committed in the past. It's so hard to keep track of that. But we know for a fact that he boasts about his sex offending, and a judge found that he had libelled a woman who accused him of rape, which is where the phrase adjudicated rapist comes from. And the idea that you can grab women by their genitals once you achieve a certain level of celebrity and or power, and I suppose most obviously both, that idea explains how Mohammed Fayed could get away with his serial sex offending as well. There is a point at which not only do you achieve a form of impunity, but you also can surround yourself with people who will defend you from the consequences of your own actions, who will help you create a false reality. You probably remember Nigel Farage coming into bat for Donald Trump after he confessed to being a serial sex offender. There are always people whose own self-interest, self-advancement and greed will persuade them to defend the indefensible. And that's the word I'm picking up on first this morning, indefensible. Indefensible. Because one of the things I drew, in fact, the main thing I drew from John's book, from John Sopel's book, I think John's on full disclosure this week, actually. I'm pretty sure he is. So we'll play a little clip from that later in the programme. But the thing that I read with goggle eyes was his recollections of the events of January the 6th, when Donald Trump essentially unleashed a mob of murderous lunatics upon Congress, upon Capitol Hill, baying for the blood of his own vice president, Mike Pence. And I knew at the time, and I know now, what the details of the scandals, the story, the situation were. But the reason I read it goggle-eyed was because sometimes when the evidence is all assembled in one place, page upon page, even though you know it all, seeing it all assembled in one place is a strange experience, a strangely cathartic experience, or shocking is a better word, a strangely shocking experience. So you may, I don't know, remember that they had gallows with them, which you think must have been some sort of pantomime prop. But what Sopel reminds you of as you read into it is that actually, no, there were people who would, had they succeeded, they would have tried to kill the vice president because he was refusing to ratify the election. He was refusing to do his democratic duty, his constitutional duty, and ratify the results of the election and therefore anoint Joe Biden as President of the United States of America. The Secret Service were phoning their loved ones to make their peace and to say their goodbyes because their hiding places in the Capitol building they feared would be breached. They thought they would be found. And these people who were very much responding to Donald Trump's exhortations, very much doing his bidding, they were going to kill members of Mike Pence's security on the way to killing Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence, the Speaker of the House, who would have the role, I think, of anointing Joe Biden as president if Mike Pence wasn't there, and Mike Pence himself, Donald Trump's own vice president. I mean, do you know, part of me wonders whether, as the American election gets closer, we should just sit here every day reflecting upon where we are. We're looking at the very real possibility of that man returning to the White House. A man who sought to subvert democracy in the most irrefutable and inarguable way. A man who unleashed a murderous mob upon his own vice president because he was so incapable of admitting defeat. It's extraordinary, right? And a man who sat there, something else, I must stop plugging John's book and start plugging my own again. There's something else in John's book about Trump sitting in the dining room at the White House where he'd had a massive television installed. Previous presidents hadn't felt the need to have a massive television screen in front of them when they were eating their dinner. And just watching it as people pleaded with him to intervene, pleaded with him to do things. He was watching it, hoping against hope that the insurrectionists, the rioters, the aspiring murderers would succeed. And if you're worried about, or if you're wondering why I worry so much about where we are potentially, Ben reminds us in the first text that I'll read out, the second text that I'll read out today, very simply that J.D. Vance, if he becomes vice president, would be more than willing to do what Mike Pence refused to do that day, and that will be one of the main reasons why Trump has appointed him. So when Keir Starmer talks about the need for a good relationship with Donald Trump. And this is where, if you're wondering, this is where I wonder whether I understand anything. So I move effortlessly on mornings like this. I don't know whether I had an extra shot of espresso or something like that, but I can move effortlessly from seeing patterns in all sorts of things to wondering whether I actually understand anything. David Lammy has described Donald Trump as a neo-Nazi sociopath and a tyrant in a toupee. I don't know whether Trump wears a toupee or not, but I do know that he's a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathizing sociopath and poses a profound threat to the international order that has been the foundation of Western progress for so long. I don't know whether or not that is something he would now resile from, but when he said it, it was just a matter of fact. And he, as recently as July, having become Foreign Secretary, insisted that he stood by his historical comments. I don't know that he would make them now, because, of course, he's Foreign Secretary, but he has essentially said that he will work with whoever ends up in the White House. Emily Thornberry, a similarly outspoken senior Labour politician, has kind of found herself in a similar situation where she has to acknowledge that there needs to be a certain amount of relationship building. You can't march into the room and call him a racist, but she has given an interview this morning in which she explains that she does. I mean, this is hardly a controversial or even a challengeable position. She does believe that he is a racist and that you call out the racist conduct if it occurs. Which brings us back to Mohammed Fayed, doesn't it? And I don't know whether I've got this right. Arabic scholars can possibly enlighten me. I call him Mohammed Fayed because I think Al is an honorific that he bestowed upon himself. I think I don't know if that sounds petty or even accurate, but I just remember from the distant days when I was a gossip columnist, someone telling me, don't call him Mohammed Al-Fayed. It makes him sound grander than he is. It's an honorific that he has bestowed upon himself, the Al. It brings us back to Mohammed Fayed, where if you wanted to rise through the ranks at Harrods when he was in charge, then you would have to either turn a blind eye or help facilitate his sex offending. And that's when the question of whether we understand anything at all kicks in. So, listen, I suppose the obvious question is, should Keir Starmer be cozying up to Donald Trump? To which the answer might be, yeah, of course he should be, stupid. There's a very real possibility that they'll be the two most powerful people in the English-speaking world this time next year. Or two most powerful politicians. We may talk about Elon Musk later. But is it that simple? Because the other question, the one that made me think that I don't know anything, what would happen if a UK Prime Minister, if Keir Starmer in this case, were to say to and about Donald Trump that you are beneath contempt and we cannot, in all conscience, have anything to do with you? Because that's how Mohammed Fayed survived for so long. Because people would not call him out. People would not prioritise principle over self-interest. People would not jeopardise their own fortunes in order to do what was obviously right. Do you see what I mean? You see what the link is. It's a bit tenuous, obviously, but in some ways it's absolutely crystal clear and watertight. If nobody ever says Donald Trump's conduct is contemptible, Donald Trump's depravity, his amorality is a deal breaker, Donald Trump as an adjudicated rapist, as a multiply convicted felon, as an obvious I was going to say scoundrel, but that sounds a little bit Ealing Comedy or Terry Thomas, doesn't it? But you take my point. As a truly disgusting human being, by any objective measure, we apparently can't turn around and say, we are not going to do business with you. Keir Starmer has said it was good that he had the opportunity to meet the Republican presidential nominee and that the meeting was, quotes, really to establish a relationship between the two of them. They had apparently discussed the long-standing friendship between the UK and the US and the importance of continuing to develop the strong and enduring partnership between our two countries. Trump said of Starmer, I actually think he's very nice. He ran a great race. He did very well. It's very early. He's very popular. And one report at the BBC puts in the very next line, David Lammy had previously called the former president a racist and a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath. A 2-hour dinner they had. So I've got 3 questions for you. I always do, don't I? When I start talking at 10 o'clock, I'm never quite sure I've got one question. By the time I get to 15:15, I've almost always got 3. The first one is the strangest one. And it only just occurred to me as I read those words. How does this make you feel? You know what Donald Trump is. If you want to deny what Donald Trump is, there are websites where you can spend the rest of the morning, I'm sure. This is not really the kind of... it just isn't. It's too late. I can't help you now. You want to deny the evidence of your own eyes and ears. You want to deny the evidence of convictions, of court cases, of multiple affidavits, attestations. I think Rudy Giuliani, his favourite lawyer, was struck off in another district yesterday. You remember the press conference outside the garden centre that they mistakenly booked because they thought it was a hotel. All of it. But most of all, January the 6th. Most of all, the willingness, the... determination, if you like, to resist defeat, even if it meant murdering his own vice president. That man there could be back in the White House next year, early next year. How does the fact that Keir Starmer has to cozy up? No, that's not true. How does the fact that Keir Starmer has cozied up to him make you feel? Did Keir Starmer have any choice? 2 questions. That's question 1 and question 2. How does it make you feel? 0345 6060 973. Did he have any choice at all? 0345 6060 And then question 3, where I possibly expose myself to the risk of looking very ignorant, but I'm happy to do that in pursuit of enlightenment, in pursuit of shared knowledge. What would happen? No one knows the answer to this for sure, except possibly the late Peter Jay, who passed away this week, or Kim Darroch, another former ambassador to America. I don't know, or the head of MI6. What would happen if Keir Starmer said, while in America for a United Nations meeting, that we are not going to have anything, win or lose, we will not have anything to do with Donald Trump because his CV is so filthy. We will not. I'm thinking of Chamberlain and Hitler. We will have nothing to do with this man. We will not appease him. We will not pretend, or we will not look the other way or hold our noses. What would actually happen if a UK Prime Minister, from any party, but we're talking about Keir Starmer, stood up in America this week, in Washington this week, in New York for the UN General Assembly this week, and said, I am not going to have anything to do with Donald Trump? So 3 questions. Number 1, how does this meeting make you feel? And you can come at that from any angle you want. Number 2, does he have any choice? Which leads inevitably to number 3. What would happen if he said, no, I'm not going to have anything to do with this man? What would it do to the UK? What would it do to the world? What would it do to the so-called special relationship? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. The time is 20 minutes past 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
That's a relief. Sometimes I can tell by the texts that you send into the programme that I haven't gone completely bonkers, and that the slightly unexpected avenue that we've gone down for the first phone-in of the day is going to prove fertile. Loz writes, I'm pretty damn angry and embarrassed by association, James. I'm less and less convinced that he has no choice each day. It would probably destroy Trump's campaign, and it could cause a landslide against him throughout the United Nations, whereas Timothy Schofield paraphrases Sun Tzu and writes, keep your friends close and your wig-wearing fascist presidents closer. Jackie says, cozying up is very emotive language. Isn't it better for Keir Starmer to understand what he might be dealing with from January of next year if Trump wins, which is where the fired card gets played, Jackie? How depraved would Donald Trump have to be for somebody like Keir Starmer to say, we will not play ball with you? Richard describes NATO being weakened and Putin being encouraged and democracy being threatened if Keir Starmer did do what I'm wondering whether he should do. And Claire, contrastingly, thinks it might help Harris win, therefore he should do it. And Zoe, I think, knitting together a couple of these themes. Absolutely, Keir Starmer had no choice but to be friendly and tolerant towards Trump, in the same way that if you don't like your in-laws or your boss, you have to act civil and friendly, regardless of what you think of them and how awful they may be. Britain cannot risk not being friends with America. Security people cannot risk not being in favour with Mohammed Fayed, which frees him to go on raping and sexually assaulting women. And I guess some people listening will just think, oh, stop being so naive, James. That's the way the world works. Nothing's changed since the days of Henry VIII. 24 minutes after 10. Sahara is in Leicester. Sahara, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, the reason I called in is because, I'll be honest, this US election thing, I've gone way too far down this rabbit hole.
Go on.
So so the first thing is, how does it make me feel? With Keir cozying up to Trump, if you want to put it that way.
Well, maybe we'll take Jackie's advice on that and not say cozying up. Let's just say breaking bread, because they had dinner together. So breaking bread with Donald Trump,
who apparently has a terrible odour, by the way. Again,
okay, that's taken a turn. What does he allegedly smell of?
So feces and fake tan, apparently.
Feces and fake tan. That was the name of my first band. Is that linked to the claims that he wears an adult diaper?
Yes.
I don't know if any of this is true. I didn't know what you meant by rabbit hole, but I sure do now. So back to the questions on the board, please, Sahara.
With what Keir breaking bread with Donald Trump, he has to do it. This is the UK in the US. Yes. Old allies. So in what circumstances would he not have? This is the thing I'm going to be worrying at today. Is there anything that the leader of the United States or the leader of Germany in the 1930s could do
that would cause a British leader to say, no, actually, we're not going to have anything to do with you?
Well, I suppose, first of all, the Donald Trump thing as well, because I've been looking at this from the American side a lot.
Yes.
He's doing terribly, by the way. What's being pushed externally, and within America, he's doing terribly. Kamala's annihilating him. Like
there's some confusion over his failure to do better, but it's by no means a foregone conclusion. I don't think anybody.
No, absolutely not. No. And it's a lot of it's down to sexism. A lot of it's down to racism as well with Kamala. So it could well be he could win, and that's the reason I think that Keir needs to have that, because he could win, and you can't cut ties with an entire country. And if he does win, who knows what will happen? I can't imagine. I don't know if there'll be. So
I'm getting an idea of how you feel.
Yeah.
You are very much subscribing to the idea that Keir Starmer has no choice.
This point.
Which takes us to question 3. What would the consequences be if he felt that he did have a choice and exercised that choice to say no?
Honestly, Donald Trump is so involved in, like, he's very much, if you like him, he likes you times. If you don't like him, then he'll go after you. And I think if he does win, this guy's going to have access to the nuclear codes. And
he's not going to launch nuclear bombs at the United Kingdom because Keir Starmer snubbed him.
This is the thing. This guy is insane, James. I don't think you understand.
I do understand. Of course I understand. He set a murderous mob on his own vice president.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But these could equally be reasons why you should never sit down and break bread with him. I don't think you understand, Sahara. This guy is insane. What is the UK Prime Minister doing having dinner with him?
Yeah, I get it. It's kind of he could well become the leader of the US. So it's a difficult one. Like, I would like to think it's a. Again, this is a wishful thinking, definitely. But hopefully, Keir had a horrible time and did it through gritted teeth. And I
don't think so. Yeah. I mean, Trump's coming out saying good things. I imagine Keir Starmer's camp take that as a win, and that. And if we're going to go back to question 1, how does that make you feel? It makes me feel a bit soiled. Not in the way that you began this contribution by alluding to, but it just makes me feel a bit soiled. There's a UK Prime Minister basking, possibly an unfair word, in the praise of an adjudicated rapist, a self-confessed sex offender, a myriad criminal, a sponsor of all manner of horrors in his own country. He sort of parallels with 1930s Germany. Might initially seem a bit extreme. He almost invaded his own country. Well, what do you think a coup is? Invading Poland is one thing. Mounting a coup in your own country, defying the results of a democratic election, I think is comparable. Politically, morally, call it what you will. If you're just joining us, we are having a bit of a mad one, which is strange. I normally only do things like this on Mondays when I feel all fresh and bushy-tailed, but this is where my brain has gone this morning. Keir Starmer having dinner with Donald Trump at Trump Tower. Again, Mohammed come to the mountain, or the mountain come to Mohammed. Keir Starmer went to Trump Tower, described it as good to have the opportunity to meet the Republican presidential nominee, and that it was to establish a relationship between the two of them. Trump came out with warm words, whatever they're worth, because, of course, he can turn on a sixpence. I actually think he's very nice. He ran a great race. He did very well. It's very early. He's very popular. I'm much closer to David Lammy's previous description of Donald Trump as a racist and a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath. But David Lammy has had to account for these words. I'll play you a little clip after the news of David Lammy being caught, if you like, in the horns of his own historical comments. 3 questions. How does it make you feel? Does Keir Starmer have any choice? And what would happen if he did the simple right thing and said, no, sorry, mate. My United Kingdom is going to have nothing to do with you as President of the United States of America. It's 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. If you want to know how people like Mohammed Fayed or Harvey Weinstein get away with their serial sex offending, here's Kylie to tell you. In response to the question of how Keir Starmer should treat Donald Trump, she writes, he's a professional, James. He doesn't have a hissy fit because a person he dislikes in his workplace. Well, take that phrase away and replace it with rapist. He doesn't have a hissy fit because there's a rapist in his workplace. It's the difference between being a petulant child or a grown-up. It's not, Kylie. It's the difference between thinking that rapists are bad and rapists are the same as annoying colleagues. I find that text frankly extraordinary. I'm not going to put you in Idiot's Corner because I think you might be ill. 10:34 is the time. Brendan is in New York. Yes, that one. Brendan, what would you like to say?
Well, first I would like to say my name is Brendan O'Brien.
Good Lord. You're not about to make a revelation on live radio, are you, Brendan?
We're long lost cousins, what I say. But no, so I live in New York City, and as for the UN, I actually won an international UN competition as a UK in high school. So, and I'm very familiar with the area. I wanted to make a sort of a left-wing American contribution about it, but before I make an assertion that you might disagree with, I'd like to try to have my credentials about Trump made.
Okay.
So when Trump came down the escalator, right, and he announced his bid for presidency, if you remember, one of the first things he said was that Mexicans are all rapists and terrible people, right? And what he meant was anyone below the border speaking Spanish, because a lot of our immigrants at that time were Salvadoran and Guatemalan anyway.
Yes.
So he meant anyone speaking Spanish working in a kitchen is a rapist. That's what his mindset was.
Yeah.
So the group I was a part of protested outside Trump Tower that day. And that day, it was just us and a couple immigrant groups. And I was part of protests that continued until they were large, shut down all of Fifth Avenue, and I was pepper sprayed by the NYPD for doing so.
Wow.
So I do not like Donald Trump.
You have skin in the game.
I've hated him from
Okay.
I've hated him from day one, and I've done all these things, yes. But my argument would be that I think that it would be just as inappropriate if you're talking about the relationship between the UK and America for a UK prime minister to blindly accept the behavior of even Joe Biden or Kamala Harris if you're talking about just the role of the UK and the US in the world, because when you look at something that's happening in Gaza right now, it was not Donald Trump who essentially greenlit a year-long genocide in Gaza, right? So as much as we talk about the disgusting predilections...
For the record, genocide is your word. It is something being investigated by the International Criminal Court. There'll be a lot of people listening to this program who are profoundly offended by your use of that word, but it is absolutely your right to deploy it.
But I'm also profoundly offended by the behavior of people who are supporting what's going on and how they speak on your show as well.
Absolutely.
Just for objectivity.
That is how freedom of speech works.
And so as an American, what I would say is that, the relationship between the UK and the US is a very important relationship in the world, right?
And it must be prioritized above individual behaviors.
Right. So while his individual behavior is absolutely disgusting and defensible, right, as someone from a left-wing Labour Party, I would hope that Keir Starmer, whoever the president is, would be able to look him in the face and make difficult decisions, because I feel like, unfortunately, that has not been happening for the past year anyway. You understand what I'm saying?
I do, and until you are at war, then diplomatic relations remain. And even when you are at war, they almost certainly unfold behind the scenes. So Churchill had to break bread with Stalin, at every point in the Second World War, who he despised and found despicable and knew about some of the stuff that was going on in Russia. So there is literally nothing that Donald Trump, if he is democratically elected, I guess the question changes if he is the beneficiary of a successful coup as opposed to the architect of a failed one, which is his current status. If he is democratic,
at this point,
I think so too.
And I'm in the middle of it.
Yeah, you are. If he's democratically elected, then Starmer has no choice but to try to keep things as sweet as possible.
I wouldn't say that. I think it would be very reasonable for him to have a hard line. It would be very reasonable for him to have a hard... I would prefer a hard-nosed approach, because I would prefer a hard-nosed approach to him or Kamala Harris, is my point.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. The lines of communication must be kept as open as possible.
And I would prefer it be focused on the effectiveness of the relationship, as opposed to just what I would even consider a silly personal back and forth, because that's what Trump wants. That's why he's so successful. Because in this country, you have to understand, anytime someone tries to get in the mud about you're a bad person, you're awful, then him and his supporters love that because they are bad supporters and awful.
This is where the deplorables line failed so miserably for Hillary Clinton.
That's how they win.
Yeah.
Because and that's how they always win, because if you try and spit in their face and say, we don't agree with your lifestyle, then they can say, well, we love our lifestyle. We're just going to be as strong as we can to get what we want done. And then they get what they want done because you're so busy trying to spit about their personal life.
So we're being a bit naive.
Yeah. And it happened to Hillary Clinton, and she's one of the most, politically complicated people in the world, and she was duped by it. And that's why, in fact, Biden was, people say, successful winning, because he was almost unable to even get into the dirt because he was mentally not really competent to do so. But he just kept falling back to issues. And that's what resonated, right? So I think what works against someone like a Trump is issue-based, what needs to get it done, because the more you whine about how bad a person he is, he'll just be like, I know, and move on.
It's a relationship with the office, not with the man, is the sort of final piece of the jigsaw that you're assembling.
I think that's much more important, because that's where people live and die.
And right? Yet, I return to the fact that this is enabling behaviour for all of the depraved conduct that Donald Trump indulges in. But you've made a great job of keeping the two separate. On a slightly different note, when we talk about the special relationship on this side of the Atlantic, how does that sound on the other side of the Atlantic?
I was actually joking before with the person who called me in and asked about it. I would say that it's very important to us, one, because of our independence, right? We were originally British colonies, so our whole birthing story in George Washington, all of our founding fathers were initially largely English themselves and dealt with you guys. Our Star-Spangled Banner is about the war we had with you. And then we have to understand our modern position in the world really comes from our interventions in World War II and World War I on the behest of the UK. And I would say that sort of the sunsetting of the grand importance of the English Empire, UK Empire, was sort of a mantle that we took on and take very seriously. You're probably the only country in the world politically that we respect for any reason. It certainly isn't France or Germany.
Yeah, although that may not be true of Donald Trump, it's true of or elements of what you've said may not be true of Donald Trump. It's true.
We're a very militaristic country, and so our roots in World War II are essentially how we really view the world nowadays, and so we see the relationship as very, very strong and important, and that's the thing. It is, and that's why I say it's important, because when you say enabling his behavior, understand he and people like him are always going to behave the way they behave, right? But I
think that's easy for men to say. That's easy for men to say, Brendan. I
understand, but I would say is if we're talking about the world and how the UK and the US run the world, I think it's more important that things get done properly. And I think even with Biden, that hasn't been doing a great job, unfortunately.
No, for sure. I look forward to our next conversation, cousin. That was great.
I hope so. Thank you.
At 10:41 is the time. And actually, as Brendan was speaking, my friend Mitch Ben, I think he's on tour at the moment, so do check him out if you get the chance. He reminded me of The Guardian's anti-Bush letter writing campaign in 2004. Didn't we do one for Trump as well? Do you remember that, when The Guardian encouraged its readers to write to individual people in America, urging them not to return George W. Bush to the White House? And I think that individual people in America responded by saying, get stuffed. I need to refresh my memory of the details on that. But Mitch goes on, there are reasons for Starmer to keep his distance from Trump, but the idea that denouncing him would help Harris in November is naive. It would entrench Trump's base and nudge independents towards him, yeah? And there would also be, keep your beak out of our business, big ears, wouldn't it? Like the corollary, if you like, of what happened when Barack Obama told the truth about Brexit. And Brexiters had a variety of hissy fits, up to and including claiming that American presidents had absolutely no business interfering in British politics, and vice versa, although some of the people that said that have progressed to, should we say, providing services for Donald Trump when he was president of the United States. Andy's in Coulsdon. Andy, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I've been listening forever. I've been listening since you did the round robins at Christmas. That's how long I've been listening.
Should we bring them back? Do you think anyone still gets them? We should try and bring them back this year, but I think they might have died out.
I'm sure they have, but I used to love them.
I'm going to make a note of that. Right, Keith, write that down, will you? Let's see if we can resurrect the round robins this Christmas, all right? Carry on, Andy.
Yeah, okay. Well, basically what I'm thinking is, as much as I dislike Trump, I think he's a despicable human being and my fingers are totally crossed for Harris to win.
Sure.
But if there's any chance he gets in, this is the man that's talking about potentially taking us out of NATO, not providing Ukraine with any more money for weapons, etc., etc. It's so important we keep a dialogue open, just in case we can provide any influence over him whatsoever. Just to cut that off would just be ridiculous, in my opinion.
And that is the difference between diplomacy and, what would we call it, ideological purity.
Yeah, absolutely.
The idea that if you don't have, if you're not in the tent, then you're outside the tent. And if you're outside the tent, you can't influence anything that goes on in the tent.
Absolutely.
So he has no choice. So he has no choice then. I mean, I don't
think so.
I'll play the little Lammy clip after the next hiatus, but it might look like Lammy and Thornberry are sort of backtracking or being hypocritical, but there is a difference between issuing warnings in opposition and conducting government in power. And you can't say in power, or you can't do in power what you might say in opposition. I can warn you. So imagine that you were in line to become my boss and I hated you and I knew that you've run radio stations into the ground before and you're absolutely shocking and you're the worst radio station manager in the history of the world. And I'm telling everyone this. I'm telling the chairman, I'm telling the chief executive, I'm telling the managing editor. I do not hire Andy in Coulsdon. The man's a monster. Listen, he's absolutely shocking. Here's some testimony from people that worked on his last radio station. They just do not. And then they give you that. There you go. They're on the phone. They're about to offer you the job, Andy. And then they give you the job. And I love my job. I've got to work with you, right?
Yeah,
You've got to try and find a middle ground. I'll let you answer that, Andy. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. Keir Starmer said, I'm a great believer in personal relations on the international stage. I think it really matters that you know who your counterpart is in any given country and know them personally, get to know them face to face. Keir Starmer clearly not subscribing to the school of thought that suggests Kamala Harris is already over the line in the American presidential election. And, as my callers have repeatedly explained to me, you have to, if you are Prime Minister, set aside concerns about everything from attempted coups to personal depravity, because this is a person with whom you are going to do business. Nobody's really had a go at the substantive elements of what would happen if he did. What would happen if Keir Starmer did say to and about Donald Trump, we're just not going near you because you're disgusting? What would actually happen? So you can talk about the special relationship. You can talk about influence or being inside the tent and out of it. What would actually happen? As it stands, I think what we've tracked this hour is the difference between being a phone-in host and being a very senior politician in a position of power. When you're a phone-in host, you can make sweeping statements or you can subscribe to notions of ideological purity, but pragmatism, and how often has that word been applied to Keir Starmer? Pragmatism is a very different beast. And you know, as I had that thought during the last junction, I suddenly remembered that one of the people we've been talking about today, he did in fact, well, he's been on that journey, hasn't he? He has been on the journey from phone-in host to very senior politician in power and now on the world stage. Here's David Lammy talking to BBC Breakfast shortly after the general election result.
You have described him as, and I quote, a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, unquote. You also labelled him a, and I quote, tyrant in a toupee, unquote. How does that set up a relationship for you and potentially him if he wins the US presidential election?
You're going to struggle to find any politician who has not had things to say about Donald Trump in his first term, particularly on Twitter. You would have struggled with our last Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, who described him as a xenophobe and a misogynist.
Okay, so you may be justifying your comments, but how do you
forgive me, let me answer the question. You will struggle with the vice presidential candidate that he's just selected, who's also had things to say. The truth of our relationship is it is a special relationship. We saw how special it was over the skies of Israel and Jordan, where our military came together to stop those missiles falling on those two countries just a few weeks ago. We will work with whomever the American people choose to be in the White House over generations now. Whatever the colour of the political party in number 10 or the White House, the UK and the US
let you answer
work
the question,
together
but you
extremely closely.
You haven't actually answered the question. If you have to meet Donald Trump...
I think I have answered the question, you just didn't like the answer.
Not for me to like or dislike your answers, it's for me to get out a clear answer. If you were to meet Donald Trump after describing him as a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, do you think that sets a good tone for our Foreign Secretary and potentially the new President of the United States?
Well, as I've said, you'll struggle to find anyone who hasn't had things to say about Donald Trump. He's just picked a vice president who's had some pretty choice language.
And what do you make of his comments then?
The truth is, when I speak to Republicans, and I've spoken to many, as you know, including those who might be his defense secretary or secretary of state, Donald Trump has the thickest of skins.
If you say the truth is 3 times, it means you have no idea what you're about to say next. Either that or Beetlejuice appears. I can never remember which way round it is. 10:52 is the time. Nagaman Chetty there, providing very, very good. She's very good, isn't she? Great questioning there. But I thought Lammy dealt with it quite well, throwing it to J.D. Vance, who is Trump's own vice presidential nominee, throwing it to David Cameron, the former Conservative Foreign Secretary, kind of gets him off the hook of extraordinary behaviour. It gets him off the hook of having gone to a place or done something that other politicians haven't done. And yet, there it is. Now you have to do the polar opposite. You cannot march into the room today, whether it's at Trump Tower in New York for dinner yesterday or whether it is in the event of him getting into the White House, and hit him over the head with his own record. Emily Thornberry, who's also been very outspoken about Donald Trump in the past and is now the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, has said that you have to do a certain amount of relationship building, but that they're adding that the UK shouldn't pull our punches. Does anyone want to have a go? And she added that she does think Trump is racist and that racist conduct should be called out if it occurs. I don't know quite how that would work. No, does anyone want to have a go at what would actually happen? Still time. 0345 6060 973. What would happen? We don't know. This is what I meant at 10 o'clock when I said the days when you realise you don't know anything. Talking about the Middle East yesterday, conversations that often highlight how little we know, especially, I think, often the case if you're completely welded to one side in a conflict. You turn out often to be the most ignorant observers or the most ignorant understanders of nuance. What do we know? We talk about the special relationship. What would happen? Would it affect Five Eyes? Five Eyes, Keith, not the burger place. Would it affect? We'd keep Five Guys even if Keir Starmer offended Donald Trump. But Five Eyes, NATO, I don't know what would happen if Keir Starmer said we will not do business with the Donald Trump White House because he is so dangerous and disgusting. Justin's in Muswell Hill. Justin, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello, Justin.
Couple of things. One, I firmly agree with all your previous callers and, of course, yourself.
You're not really agreeing with me. The callers have been giving me a bit, because I felt there probably was a choice, and I'd quite like a world in which people like Donald Trump or Mohammed Fayed are considered to be beyond the pale. But I don't know that I live in that world.
The point I was going to make, I think we all agree Donald Trump is a disaster and a terrible human being, but I'd like to focus more on the job that Sir Keir Starmer's doing. And I think he's playing an absolute blinder for the country. And I think he's acting like a proper CEO for a company would. And in this case, his company is this country. This country's on its knees, largely a result of the 2016 referendum and pulling out of the EU.
Yes.
And he is making all the tough decisions. He's not going down the route of previous prime ministers, trying to get instant thumbs up on social media and stuff like that. He's making tough decisions. And this is one tough decision he has to make. And I think as well, the fundamental point about what happens in America comes back to democracy. And as you mentioned earlier, we're not talking about a coup. If, and I hope it doesn't, but if Donald Trump is elected President of the United States, we as a country, and Keir Starmer as a Prime Minister, has to respect the views of the American public, no matter how much we may disagree with it.
Yes.
But I think it's the right thing to do. And, going back again to the Brexit decision, if we talk about potential trade partners and getting the country back on its feet, we know as a result of coming out of Brexit, we'll be far more powerful in the tent than we would do outside the tent. We've lost that connection with Europe on a trade capacity. If we can have any chance of improving the country's economics, which is what Keir Starmer's main role is. Keir Starmer's main role.
I think we part company slightly here. I think Starmer's motivation is probably more to do with foreign relations than domestic. I mean, the stuff that Trump is saying about tariffs, going after John Deere, the tractor manufacturer this week, the idea of him giving anything to anybody that is to their benefit as opposed to his benefit, I think is pretty slim. I mean, you're veering, and I don't say this lightly, Justin, because it's a horrible thing to say about anyone. You're veering into Kemi Badenoch territory here, mooting. I'm sorry, mate. That's a bit far. Mooting the possibility that there is some golden trade deal in just within reach in the event of Trump getting back into the White House.
Yeah, I think, I mean, yes, that is true. But I think as well, we know that Donald Trump is probably the most petulant human being on the earth.
Yes.
And as soon as he decides he's against you, he will do everything to be against you.
That's true. So why pick that fight? What do we gain, apart from ideological purity, apart from principal points? And you can't take them to the bank, can you?
No, but I think that's why we have to hold, well, rather, Keir Starmer has to hold his nose, hope against hope that Kamala Harris gets in. But, you know, we've realised as a result of Brexit that, you know, we are not this huge, independent, powerful country, and we do need allies, even if that ally, if the head of that ally is someone as odious as Donald Trump. I prefer that we look at it in relations with America rather than relations with Trump.
Yeah, or relationship with the office rather than the relationship with the individual. I think both of those of those work. And in fact, the thank you, Justin. The contradiction or the opposite would be, I think, hasn't Honest Bob Jenrick come out and said that he wants Trump actually to win? So he's actually come out calling for one of them to win, which of course puts you in the highly unlikely event of Honest Bob ending up Prime Minister. It puts him in the bad books of whoever the American president is, if it's not Donald Trump. Thank you. That was great, bringing Brexit into it. In fact, come back for a minute, Justin. You managed to bring Brexit into it, mate. I thought that's an extraordinary achievement for you to beat me to that on a programme like this. So thank you. That's, you spare me the usual insults and accusations. However, we still have an idiot's corner. Here's Dan. He writes, Lammy went on Mastermind and gave an answer that Henry VII came to power after the Henry VIII, and he couldn't even name a single blue cheese. Is it any surprise that he mouthed off and backtracked? So Dan thinks that David Lammy embarrassing himself on Mastermind somehow explains how you can insult someone in opposition but not insult them when you're in power. Dan, in fact, casting himself, I think, there as the clever person in this conversation. I'm going to have to say something to Dan that may sound a little boastful, but until you've actually been on Celebrity Mastermind, you have absolutely no idea how nerve-wracking it is. And the ease with which somebody could completely lose the plot, lose their thread, lose their wherewithal to identify the answers to relatively straightforward questions that you would get completely right in any other context. I saw it happen in the studio to a friend of mine. Get a couple of questions wrong and your mind goes. Your brain starts racing, and it's almost impossible sometimes to rein it back in again. So until you've done it, Dan, wind your neck in. Oh, and when you do it, you won't do as well as me.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11, and it's time for another little insight into how the media works, particularly the right-wing media. There are 3 stories in the news today concerning COVID-19, and one of them has been handled in some quarters of the Fourth Estate, some newspapers, in a way that almost makes their coverage of the ludicrous claims that Labour was about to shut pubs early look like responsible journalism. If you thought that the desperate attempts to pretend that Labour was considering to closing pubs or reducing closing times on pubs, even though every article that was headlined with the claim that Labour was going to close pubs contained the line, this has been completely and categorically denied by the Department of Health. Not that it stopped some people from going off on a right old rage. Then there's a story about Chris Whitty's evidence to the COVID-19 inquiry yesterday that makes that despicable journalism look almost responsible. I'll come to that third. The first story in the news today that should be getting a heck of a lot more attention than desperate attempts to pretend that Chris Whitty believes that the COVID danger was overpitched or exaggerated is the story of COVID currently being on the rise in England, with experts warning that we need to do more to prevent and control infection. There's been a capitulation to the virus, according to a senior immunologist at Imperial College London, and that people working in the field are completely perplexed by the current attitude to the battle against COVID. And this isn't an opinion, this is counting the latest figures showing an increase in hospital admissions. So the numbers are not huge, but the increase is pretty hefty. You look at the week between 16 and the 22nd of September, this year, and the figure is 3.71 people per 100,000. The week before, it was 2.56. So it's gone up a lot, but the numbers remain small. The increase is significant. So that's a story we should be talking about, and may well do a little later. I'll do the scandalous journalism second. The second story is this thing that we discussed quite a lot at the time, the way that right-wing newspapers were determined to rewrite the history of COVID. And we thought that it was because they wanted to exonerate Boris Johnson from personal responsibility for goodness knows how many deaths. Because the kind of people that are seeking to rewrite the history of COVID are precisely the kind of people who've spent much of the last decade tickling Boris Johnson's tummy. And indeed, in many cases, continue to do so. And I'll read you this because I thought I'd got used to this stuff. So the Sun today goes with Whitty, fear of COVID overdone. So you're thinking, crikey, Chris Whitty thinks that we frighten people too much on COVID. You turn to the Daily Mail. COVID danger may have been overpitched, admits Whitty. So the Daily Mail marginally more nuanced than the Sun. A, they've put overpitched in quotes, whereas the Sun puts it as a bold statement of fact. And B, they've inserted the word may, not the word was, or indeed in the case of the Sun, no words at all, simply fear of COVID overdone. The was is silent. Read into it, however, and you will discover, as you would expect from a man as thoughtful and as careful as Chris Whitty, that what he actually described was a continuing uncertainty that they got the level of concern exactly right. In fact, that's what he said. He said, I still worry, actually in retrospect, about whether we got the level of concern right. Were we either overpitching it so that people were incredibly afraid of something where in fact their actuarial risk were low, or we were not pitching it enough and therefore people didn't realise the risk that they were walking into. So what he has said is that he still worries that they either went too far or not far enough. At the very beginning, he thinks possibly they overdid it rather than underdid it at the absolute outset. But when he looks back upon the whole period of COVID, he still doesn't know whether they went too far or not far enough. So any coverage that claims it is a retrospective admission that they went too far is profoundly dishonest. It's incredible, isn't it, how bent this whole world can be sometimes. We may have gone a bit too far to start with, but overall, I'm equally worried that we didn't go far enough. I don't know what nuance, I don't know how you spell nuance in your world, but so much of the coverage has completely ignored that nuance that it breaks your heart. But it doesn't break your heart as much as this, which is some of the evidence given yesterday by Professor Kevin Fong, who is a former National Clinical Advisor in Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response. It was a quite extraordinary contribution to the COVID inquiry yesterday for two reasons. Number one, because of its profundity and impact. And number two, because of the question marks that it ignites above all of our heads. And I think that the question I'm going to ask, and I may change my mind slightly as we listen together to this somewhat harrowing testimony, I think the question I'm going to ask is, how bad was it? And alongside that question, for medical professionals, how it feels to reflect upon how quickly we've all forgotten, or that we never really knew. It was such a strange period, wasn't it? And we were here every single day doing our best to cover it. And yet my memory plays tricks on me. I kind of remember things that can't have happened, and I don't remember things that clearly did happen. We were in such a weird limbo, weren't we? It was like a liminal space, in a sense, for an entire population waiting for normality or reality to return, except reality never left the building. It was just normality that was on holiday indefinitely. Times when we wondered if it would ever end. And the situation in hospitals, which we covered a lot, but I think we possibly had a little voice in the back of our heads wondering whether or not we should go in on the truly apocalyptic scenarios sometimes in hospitals for fear of frightening people or for fear of making a situation worse emotionally when we couldn't have any impact upon it whatsoever medically. But I want you to listen to this, and then I want you to tell me what it was like for you, because I know we did do it at the time. I know we did talk about it at the time, but I don't know that we, and by we I mean people who were not working in hospitals during COVID. And I want calls from people who were. 0345 6060973. All public health professionals, perhaps, but you decide whether or not Kevin Fong's words apply to you. I want to know what it was like for you, because even as someone who covered COVID-19 every day throughout the throughout the lockdowns, as the other story in the news today, getting ignored by the papers that are pretending Chris Whitty looks back and thinks that they overdid everything. The other story in the news today reminds us that the pandemic, or at least the virus, has gone nowhere. It hasn't gone away at all. But have a listen to this. Professor Kevin Fong, former National Clinical Advisor in Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response.
It's one of those things that is really very difficult to capture in figures. The scale of death experienced by the intensive care teams during COVID was unlike anything they had ever seen before. They're no strangers to death. They are the intensive care unit. They look after some of the sickest patients in the hospital. But the scale of death was truly, truly astounding. I went into this and other hospitals where they said it would be routine to see 3 to 5 deaths a day. I worked on a shift where we had 6 deaths in a single shift. Another hospital told us that they had 10 deaths in a shift, 2 of whom were their own staff. We had nurses talking about patients raining from the sky, where the nurses said that one of the nurses told me that they just got tired of putting people in body bags. Now, the hospital, they said that sometimes they were so overwhelmed that they were putting patients in body bags, lifting them from the bed, putting them on the floor, putting another patient in that bed straight away because there wasn't time. We went to another unit where things got so bad, they were so short of resource that they ran out of body bags, and they were instead issued with 9-foot clear plastic sacks and cable ties. And those nurses talk about being really traumatized by that because they had recurring nightmares about feeling like they were just throwing bodies away. These people are used to seeing death, but not on that scale and not like that. And whatever the figures show you, the experience for them was indescribable. And when we talk about capacity in healthcare systems, the toll on those teams from that scale. And it really was like nothing else I have ever seen, and certainly not like nothing else those teams had ever seen.
30 minutes after 11. These people are used to seeing death, but not like that. How has it affected you? If you are one of the people that Jonathan Fong is describing, I wonder if anyone's taken the time to ask you, outside, I hope, of your close circle, your family, your friends, if anyone's taken the time to ask you, how has it affected you? 0345 60973. We will move on, I think, also. Well, no, we may not. It depends whether or not you want this invitation or not. If you don't, and I fully understand that you might not, then the rest of us will have a conversation about why the resistance remains so prevalent. The notion of capitulating to experts' warning that we've essentially given up on trying to address it or tackle it. But the question I want to ask you first is this: what was it like, and how has it affected you? So you can hear Jonathan Fong there, very emotional, clearly on the verge of tears. I think possibly some tears were shed. Beg your pardon, Kevin Fong, describing something that we've all, I think partly through a form of psychological self-preservation, we've put it out of our minds. But you can't put it out of your mind because you were there. You were one of the people used to seeing death, but in Kevin's words, not like that. What effect do you think it's had on you? How much of the problems the NHS has today with staff shortages is down to the fact that we have not, as a society, properly looked after people traumatised by what Kevin Fong has just described? And we can do this second-hand as well, because people are sometimes a little bit reluctant to talk about the bravery and courage they showed in extraordinary circumstances. So tell me about your husband or your wife, how it's affected them, how you know if they were coming home at night. And there will have been periods, of course, where they weren't, because the nature of quarantines and isolations meant that people were kept away from their own families. But what I want to know, and I think you deserve to be asked, how it has affected you. So what was it like to be a person used to seeing death, but not like that? And how do you think it has affected you? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And a couple of you wondering how that testimony from Kevin Fong would sound to the conspiracy theorists and the anti-vaxxers and the World Health Organization skeptics, or whatever they call themselves this week. And the sad answer to that question is they won't hear it. You could play it to them 1,000 times and they just won't hear it, because once you have sold your honesty, once you've sacrificed your honesty upon the altar of self-validation and clicks, it's very hard to get back. So, what effect has it had upon you? 0345 6060 973. And I may play that clip again when we come back from the hiatus, just to set the scene for what you, I hope, well, I don't know if I hope you are going to tell me. It's more, if you don't want to talk about it, that's great. But if you do, here's an opportunity for you to do so. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Have another listen to this from Kevin Fong and then tell me how it has affected you, or indeed what you would have said if you were in his shoes at the COVID inquiry yesterday.
It's one of those things that is really very difficult to capture in figures. The scale of death experienced by the intensive care teams during COVID was unlike anything they had ever seen before. They're no strangers to death. They are the intensive care unit. They look after some of the sickest patients in the hospital. But the scale of death was truly, truly astounding. I went into this and other hospitals where they said it would be routine to see 3 to 5 deaths a day. I worked on a shift where we had 6 deaths in a single shift. Another hospital told us that they had 10 deaths in a shift, 2 of whom were their own staff. We had nurses talking about patients raining from the sky, where the nurses said that one of the nurses told me that they just got tired of putting people in body bags. Now, the hospital, they said that sometimes they were so overwhelmed that they were putting patients in body bags, lifting them from the bed, putting them on the floor, putting another patient in that bed straight away because there wasn't time. We went to another unit where things got so bad, they were so short of resource that they ran out of body bags and they were instead issued with 9-foot clear plastic sacks and cable ties. And those nurses talk about being really traumatized by that because they had recurring nightmares about feeling like they were just throwing bodies away. These people are used to seeing death, but not on that scale and not like that. And whatever the figures show you, the experience for them was indescribable. And when we talk about capacity in healthcare systems, the toll on those teams from that scale, and it really was like nothing else I have ever seen, and certainly not like nothing else those teams had ever seen.
So how has it affected you? Do you recognise that description of trauma? I like this. It made me realise why our returning soldiers in World War II refused to talk about their experiences. COVID was their war. We lost loved ones and colleagues, leaving the house with that feeling of impending doom. The medics were our heroes. Give the nurses their pay rise, he adds at the end. Sam's in Lewisham. Sam, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi James. I'm a regular listener of yours, and I was the matron in an intensive care unit for 20 years, and experienced the whole of the pandemic. And I think Kevin Fong really summarises it incredibly well. I personally have experienced major incidents like the Purley train crash, IRA bomb in Canary Wharf, and worked in a trauma centre. But it was like a major incident day after day after day and more. And the hardest thing, I think, was making my nurses go in every day when we didn't know what was going to happen to us, with a shortage of PPE, breaking all the rules, because intensive care nursing is very much one-to-one. And you were suddenly doing 1 to 2, and then you were doing 1 to 3, and there's lots of safety concerns around the medicine, the life support machines, all the equipment. At one point, we ran out of dialysis fluid for patients who were in acute kidney failure as a result of the consequences. But everyone across London in the intensive care units cooperated and worked together. At one point we were having 3 times a day video call meetings, and we were getting as much advice, help and support from our other unit colleagues. There was a fantastic system of transferring patients to other hospitals, even though we'd expanded our capacity from around 18 beds to 45 beds, using other wards, using operating theatres. But I must say, in some ways, it was the biggest test of my career, and I think we all passed it. But in other ways, it's left.
Do you think the rest of us know? Do you think the rest of us have the first idea of what you were going through? Because in some ways, Kevin Fong's words shouldn't have, stopped so many of us in our tracks, but they really did. But for you, everything you heard was an echo, wasn't it? Yeah.
What I'd say is, a colleague of mine who was the ward sister on a surgical ward had seen some reports on the TV of one of the London intensive care units, and she stopped me and said, "My God, is it really like that in there, Sam?"
Right.
And so this is somebody who works in the same hospital, didn't have any idea of what we were going through. And
that's the phrase that got me. The people are used to seeing death, but not like that.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at statistics and predicted outcome, somewhere in the region of a quarter of the patients we look after sadly die because they're so poorly when they arrive.
Yeah.
But they're not coming in, the sort of the phrases of he used. I mean, we didn't ever have to put a body on the floor to take another patient in, but we did have to have like a 2-minute turnaround at times. We, at the beginning, the supporting staff, such as the domestics and porters, wouldn't come in the unit, so I was, as well as everything else, I was mopping the floor.
And how's it? What stayed with you, Sam?
Well, I've been having, to be honest, I've been paying for counselling for the last 18 months.
And you're paying for that yourself?
Yeah, I retired early because I wanted to go while I was still emotionally intact. I think it was very, very a shocking time. But I've got to say my colleagues were wonderful, and we held each other together.
You shouldn't be paying for your own counselling, though, should you? Is that a consequence of having retired?
No, I was still working when I started having the counselling.
And they didn't offer it; that you couldn't get it from your employer.
I really don't want to sound.
No.
We were given 3 40-minute sessions if we wanted to.
And that was it.
and I did that, and they were very nice, the counsellor that I saw, but basically they were saying, I'm not surprised you feel like that, look what you've been through, which...
it's not really what you want to hear, is it, necessarily?
It's not necessarily a starting point. No.
You need to process it. You need help in processing it, learning how to sit with it.
And I'm in a lot better place now. I feel... I was quite shocked to hear it yesterday, and I'd say, rather than it's an open wound for me, it's a tender bruise now.
It's a healing wound.
Yes,
good.
Yes, and I'm very proud of everybody I work with.
Well, we're very proud of you, and we're very grateful to you, and we worry, I think, and I hope I can speak for other people here. I'm always a bit wary of doing so, but worry that the sheer scale of that debt that we owe to you and your colleagues, all of your colleagues, is still not properly acknowledged, partly because of that psychological self-preservation I talked about earlier. We want to forget it, but of course, if you've gone through what Sam went through or what other healthcare professionals went through, then you can't. Certainly not without help, which in Sam's case he's having to pay for himself. On the plus side, I suppose, Michelle Mone got a yacht, didn't she? So, balance. Gary's in Colchester. Gary, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning.
Hello.
I've been a frontline medical technician on the ambulance service for 23 years now.
Right.
I've served 18 of them in London Ambulance Service, and during that time, I've dealt with all sorts of respiratory conditions, asthmatic, bronchitis, whatever.
Yeah.
And we'd seen it all the time, and people obviously have minor, they have severe, we dealt with. And we dealt with a few breathing problems. When COVID came out, I'd literally just retired from London, and then I came back to east of England. And what I saw and what we were dealing with people who had COVID, it's left a lasting impression on me. An example that I was giving to your producer there was that I'd had a radiologist who laid on a sofa for 7 days in her own excrement and urine. And when we got in, I asked her why she'd stayed in that condition. She just said, I thought it would go away. And all my friends and a lot of people who I spoke to said, it's COVID, they would have died anyway, and things like that. And I remember there was one of the care homes I'd gone to, and I think they'd lost about 8 patients in about 5 days, and there was one who just died when we went. We weren't dealing with her. But for me, it's just people who are burying their head and they say it didn't exist, it's just one of these things, people would have died anyway.
I wonder about whether or not we even acknowledge their existence, because outside social media, I'm not sure that view really holds much weight, but I understand why you feel the need to remind us of the existence of these ghouls, these vampires.
And what they didn't see is what we saw on a daily basis of COVID. And again, a lot of people who had respiratory conditions, severe, that we were dealing with normally in London, when they had COVID, all you got from the families was, are they going to live? Are they going to die? And we just used to have to say, you need to prepare yourself. They're not very well. And we'd take the patient who, on occasions, would be conscious. And you went into the A&E room, and all they saw was obviously everyone in oxygen masks, number of patients on the beds, all on high flow oxygen. And it was just a look in their eyes. And I think that's what stuck with me, is not perhaps the condition of the patient, but literally when we went through the doors and their eyes saw what was, in front of them, I just thought it was a shame. And even now, people just go, well, I'm not going to have the COVID vaccination. I still have it, just as an in case. But so I just thought I'd give you my views on
has it
23 years.
And unlike anything else you'd ever dealt with, as with Sam, you dealt with some pretty hefty stuff over the years, but this was of a different order entirely. Did the usual tools work, or has it affected you in ways that other experiences didn't affect you?
Well, like I say, now I've got a bit of a flushed face thinking about it.
Okay.
And it was just, when we dealt with, especially in London, when I dealt with a lot of trauma, like stabbings or RTCs, things like that, you just dealt with them. But when you had the families who they were just sat in the corner, and that's what's always affected me. It's never been the symptoms of the trauma. It's always the families that did it for me. And it was such a thing that we went through. And I hope you keep seeing it. It's, creeping up a little bit. And I just hope people will just bear in mind that, yes, there are coughs, there are asthma, there's COPD. But when, COVID gets you and you've got a respiratory problem, or you're elderly, and I'm not young myself. No. I think they need to think on, really. Well, that's just my view.
And it's not just your view. It's the view of almost all the experts in the field, actually, Gary, including Professor Danny Altman, an immunologist at Imperial College, and the science behind what you've just described as your view is that the current Omicron subvariants are hugely successful at punching through any dwindling population immunity, so that we're looking at a huge prevalence of around 12%. They describe a capitulation to the virus because of the gap between now and our last vaccine dose. So good for you for minimising the length of that gap in your case. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
25 to 12 is the time. I have a few messages like this from Liz, who writes, my daughter, who's in her mid-30s, was transferred to ICU from theatres, and she still won't speak about it. This in response to Kevin Fong's testimony to the COVID inquiry yesterday, in which he talked of, frankly, horrific scenes, probably more familiar to war correspondents than health correspondents, and used a phrase which I edit slightly. Those people are used to seeing death, but not like that. It's something Paul picked up on previously, actually. He sent me a tweet that he sent last year, talking about the hospital where his wife works, being the major head trauma hospital in the Northwest. So they have deaths, normally an average of about 5 patients in ECU. At the height of pandemic, there were more than 70. One night, he wrote, that she witnessed 5 people die in the space of less than an hour. At one point, they ran out of zip-up body bags and had to use what they called body bags on a roll, and then with duct tape to seal them. And I just wonder whether, is it healthy not to talk about it? A few people suggesting parallels with people returning from war. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's up to you entirely, but I'm not so sure. In fact, someone even using the phrase "led by donkeys" to make that parallel, which the Led by Donkeys group refer to in their choice of name, make that parallel clear. And of course, it was the Led by Donkeys people, in conjunction with others, that were responsible for the memorial wall on the south bank, of the River Thames. Extraordinary, isn't it? 11:36 is the time. Kasia is in Sutton. Kasia, what would you like to say?
Hi, thank
Hello.
you for having me.
You're very welcome.
I worked on a frailty ward, which is a ward full of older people, elderly people.
Yeah.
And I work with a wonderful team over the COVID. But as my predecessor said, as Kevin said, we were used to death, but death was dignified and it was full of loads of emotion.
Yes.
But during the COVID, it was completely desensitized. It was completely emotionless. We knew that every shift is going to be a death, and every death means just wrapping people. It was completely desensitized. It almost felt like it's just another thing that you need to do at work.
You had to have that approach, otherwise it would break you.
And the fact that they didn't have anybody else apart from us, it was so difficult. Even talking about this, I didn't realize it's gonna bring back so many memories and noises and smells and everything else. I didn't realize it has affected me so much, because we often talk about this with my friends. But
right.
When I was on the phone with one of your colleagues, I didn't realize. I started crying, and I was quite surprised at myself, because I thought I am resilient, but clearly this is something. It's almost probably a PTSD of some sort. And listening to Chris Whitty and saying that we overpitched it, I don't think so. I don't think he realised
what was really happening. Not really what he said. Well, I suppose he kind of said possibly we did at the beginning, but there's no...
Possibly, but even using those phrases, it's a little bit... It's a bit upsetting, because I'm not really sure. He was not the one wrapping people in clay bags with the zip ties on and just waiting for another patient to come in. And we didn't even knew their names on occasions. It was just a bed number, and we knew that it's another one to wrap up. It's a horrible thing. Even when I say it out loud, it just sounds...
Well, maybe that's why you
horrendous.
don't. I mean, you can talk to your friends about it, but maybe the reason that your own feelings have taken you by surprise today is because... I don't know what the proper psychological advice would be, but... I mean, it's how you get through things in the short term by not dwelling and not thinking, and whether or not it's healthier to keep them buried or to dig them up later when you're ready to process them better. I just don't know, Kasia. It might not even be a rule. It might be different for different people, different approaches. You think of war veterans, people returning from war who never talk about their experiences for reasons that I suspect you understand better than I do.
Perhaps.
I don't know. None of us know. Do you?
It was just a very, very, very difficult time for, I think, whoever worked in any aspect of healthcare or care homes.
And that's the bit that I need your help with finally, which is, I don't think we had the first idea about what life was like for you, even if you told us at the time. We were so caught up in the moment, in the emergency of the moment, that and I'm not even sure people did tell us at the time. We didn't have the bandwidth, we didn't have the space, we didn't have the contact. You were too busy. I don't think the average citizen of this country has got the first idea what you and your colleagues went through for months.
No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody will be able to comprehend. We were in the moment, like you said. We were in the moment. We were in it. We were just getting on with the work. But I think if we would voice it, I don't think anybody would think that this is it. This is what's really happening. No. That we kind of overestimate everything, and we're just saying things are worse than they are. But they were really, really bad.
Well, we saw the pictures from Italy. And yet, what we're learning today is that the situation in our hospitals was as bad for a while, for a period of time.
Yes, it was.
Well, Kasia, thank you. Thank you for calling me today, but obviously even more so, thank you for doing what you did at the time. I don't know what the way forward is. I'm glad we're having this conversation today, but I don't know. And also, I'm getting plenty of messages from people who tell me that they can't talk about it and don't even want to listen to it. And I completely respect that as well. But I don't know what the way forward is. I don't know what the COVID inquiry is going to deliver. I'm also getting a lot of messages from people who remain furious about what our so-called rulers were doing throughout this period, and indeed what some elements of the media were doing then and continue to do now. But I think you'll understand why, for now at least, we focus upon people like Kasia and her colleagues and just wonder about the effects that it has had on people. Larry is an experienced ICU nurse and has been in touch to describe how moved he is by the events depicted in the clip of Kevin Fong. It wasn't just the staggering number of fatalities that affected me, James, but also the profound sense of helplessness we had in the face of this unprecedented crisis. It completely disrupted our established medical practices. What had previously been effective in supporting patients suddenly seemed utterly ineffective against this new threat. So the numbers of seriously ill, unstable, very unstable patients were difficult to manage, including sometimes our own colleagues and friends. That was another bit in Kevin Fong's testimony about the time they dealt with an unprecedented number of deaths, of which 2 were colleagues. We were caring for double the number of ventilated patients that we would stretch to in areas unsuitable for doing this. No family members allowed to visit sick relatives also took a toll because we had to try and stay professional and act as a link for them to the outside. Furthermore, we had the constant fear of exposing ourselves and our families and our loved ones to this highly contagious disease. I packed in late 2022, after 3 decades of dedicated service in the ICU, I made the difficult decision to leave my position due to the profound impact of the pandemic. The emotional toll had become overwhelming, and I found it challenging to even contemplate returning to that environment, even in a non-clinical capacity. And I read that out in its entirety because Larry speaks for many people getting in touch with me today, and many of whom describe themselves, like Jay, as being unable to call in because I am in tears thinking about it. It is an extraordinary, if you like, roll call of testimonies describing all manner of different experiences, including the partner, like Leah, who talks about her partner, a consultant anaesthetist, talking about whether he would go into work or not when there were only 2 consultants who'd passed the fit test for the only PPE that they had left. It was so old, this is the PPE, not the partner, that after 1 hour the elastic would stretch so much that it no longer fitted. He was one of 2 consultants of the 80 that it would fit, if only for an hour. And the dilemma was real. We had 4 young kids. We agonised over the risk he would be taking versus his moral obligations to his patients, versus his moral obligations to his kids. He did go in. New PPE was found within 24 hours. There was no staying home for him. We worried every day for all of us. The scandal of the PPE, the parties in Downing Street and all the rest of it still make us feel absolutely furious. And the more you talk about it, the more you wonder at this latest chapter in the saga, which is the rise of COVID in England and the warnings from experts that we need to do more to control it, and the complete absence, really, of intervention from the authorities, from the government. I don't think I've heard Wes Streeting say anything about this since he's become Health Secretary, and yet you know that my maths is not my strongest point. But if the percentage of people with symptoms who've tested positive for COVID based on tests at so-called spotter laboratories, so they test everybody for it, it's gone up in the last week from 9.1 to 11.8%. Now, that's a rise in one sense of 2.7%, isn't it, from 9.1 to 11.8. But I think it is, and this is where I apologise in advance for my maths, I think that's 29.6% if you were to do it properly. That's a huge rise in the number of people infected. And yet, nothing. I think The Guardian reports on this. All the other newspapers, certainly the right-wing newspapers, are reporting on the comments from Chris Whitty, or misreporting in many cases the comments of Chris Whitty that have upset Kasia so much. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Thank you, Alan. I am indeed describing the difference between a percentage point increase versus the absolute percentage increase. So in absolute percentage terms, the number of people testing positive for COVID has gone up by 26.9%, I think, or 29.6% in the last week, and yet nobody is really talking. Yeah, 29.6 or 29.7 if you round up the 6 because it's followed by a 7. God, it all comes back, doesn't it? It all comes back. Although sadly this didn't. I was being a bit boastful earlier about my appearance on Celebrity Mastermind, partly to remind people who think, usually racists, who think that David Lammy having a nightmare on Celebrity Mastermind is proof that he's not very clever, which is a position you'd have to be truly stupid to hold, because Celebrity Mastermind is absolutely terrifying. But Larry's been in touch all the way from Cardiff. So, right, James, I have a question for you. When Mary Jane visits her old college roommate, Eloise, in Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut, Eloise reveals that she married her husband Lou after believing his lie that the books of which English author meant a great deal to him. That's not trolling. That's sort of next level psychological warfare from Larry. That is the only question I got wrong on my specialised subject on Celebrity Mastermind. And Larry has decided to pollute my morning by texting it into my inbox. I know the answer now, Larry, obviously. It's Jane Austen, isn't it? But I didn't know it then. And do you know the really annoying thing about that was I'd read Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut the night before in the hotel, but I'd speed read it in order to try and absorb as much information like the night before an exam. I just got a block on it. Just didn't happen. Anyway, we digress. Back to the rather more important matter of what it was like and what impact it had dealing with the realities of COVID that the rest of us, I think we've established beyond much doubt today, still don't really have the first idea about. Angus is in Garston. Angus, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. We've spoken before, actually. I was working as a locum in a Cumbrian hospital, I won't name it, when it all kicked off. And everybody says it kicked off in March, but it didn't. It kicked off in December. Yeah.
We may not have known exactly what it was in December, but it kicked off.
Yeah. And I'm an MRI specialist, blah, 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 but they shut down all the MRI machines. So everybody who was capable of doing any radiology was put in A&E and taking chest x-rays on the wards and blah, 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 blah. So I hadn't taken a chest x-ray in 20 years. And suddenly I was taking chest x-rays, which was fine by me.
Sure.
But, and also, I just want to draw a slight comparison. I worked at the Royal London in the A&E department there on the trauma teams.
Right.
When I first qualified. And I was there for 7/7 in 2005.
Yeah.
I was one of the senior radiology guys in the department, along with some very capable colleagues. And that was horrendous. We had arms and legs piled up in the corners of the resus room. We had patients coming in blown to pieces.
Oh my God!
We were the most. We took, because we had HEMS on the roof, helicopter emergency medical service.
Right.
I mean, you're obviously aware of that because you live in London.
Yes.
We took the most patients easily because we were the only hospital at the time with a helipad on the roof.
Got it.
So, and also that morning there was a meeting of 8 air ambulances. So we called them all in and we had them hovering. It was like Vietnam. It was like Saigon, bringing patients in. Anyway, so that's the comparison. I worked through that and the aftermath afterwards. Blah, blah, blah.
But that was what, 48, 72 hours?
No, the initial, it kicked off at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
And my boss, my medical director, Mr. Alistair Wilson, MBE, who I've got the utmost respect for.
Clearly.
And Gareth, who was in charge of the HEMS.
Do you know, Kevin Fong was on shift on July the 7th as well, actually, the professor that we heard from earlier giving his testimony to the COVID inquiry.
Yeah, no, I was watching the COVID inquiry yesterday. I recognised him straight away.
Gosh, really?
Yep. And, I mean, obviously he's got a bit older since then. Because
haven't we all, Angus?
Yeah, because it's 19 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, it was, that was, it all kicked off at 9 a.m. I was working upstairs. I came down. Alistair Wilson said to me, they've told us there's been a power outage on the underground and there's injuries.
Yeah.
Anyway, suddenly, because they started coming in, blah, blah, blah. And it only lasted till 1 o'clock.
Right.
The initial getting them in.
The first wave.
And the operating theatres were working 24/7, 24 hours a day for weeks on end, trying to put people back together. Of course. So the initial bit was about 4 hours.
And COVID was months.
Exactly. This is the comparison I'm making. So I mean, with working at the Royal London, you do get hardened because we had shooting, stabbings, blah, blah, blah coming in.
Sure.
Anyway, but with the COVID thing, it just went on and on and on and on. And there was one specific thing which always sticks in my mind. I was called to the A&E to do a chest X-ray on a patient in the Cumbrian Hospital. So I went in, I did the chest X-ray, and she was a little old Cumbrian lady,
right? And
a real character. I'll always remember it. And she was moaning, "I don't want to be here. I've already had COVID. I want to go home." So I did a chest X-ray. I went outside to write in the notes, and just as I was leaving the cubicle, she said to me, "Please, can I have a glass of water?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll ask the nurse." So I said to the nurse, "Can she have a cup of water, please?" "Oh yeah, I'll get her one." And she walked in, and she walked straight out again. She said the last thing she needs is a glass of water.
Oh my days!
And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "She's dead.
She's gone."
Yeah, and I said, "You're winding me up." And I put my head round the door, and there she was. Yeah, head back, gone. Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, it was like that.
Commonplace. I can tell. Yeah. I mean, it's that curious mixture of the extraordinary and the ordinary, isn't it? The normal and the abnormal at the same time.
Yeah, no, it was just, it was just there. He was just there. I mean, she was there 1 second. I spoke to her 30 seconds before, and 30 seconds later, she's there with her head back, dead.
How do you think it's affected you? How do you think it? And I know we can't be sure, but what are your inklings? What are your instincts?
We had a big thing after 7/7 because we didn't get any counselling at all.
Right.
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
And then after this, I went from the frying pan into the fire. I went from this Cumbrian Hospital down to Royal Blackburn and Burnley Hospital.
Right.
And that was absolute. I mean, it was like a war zone down there. It was unbelievable. How did it affect me? I carried on working for about about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And then I was in the very lucky position where I could stop working. So I basically retired.
I'm hearing perhaps you wouldn't have done if it hadn't been for the...
Oh, no. I mean, hell. I mean, the days that... I mean, I've spoken to so many colleagues who have also retired now.
Yeah.
They reckon those 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Those 2.5 years was like working 12, 15 years.
Of course it was. Of course it was. And how fair is it to say that from your side of the hospital door, those of us on the other side haven't really got the first idea still of what you lot went through?
Well, I find it very therapeutic and cathartic to talk about it.
Good.
That's the way I do it.
Yeah.
But
not everyone
people
does.
just look at you as though as though you're writing a film script.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, not here, mate.
They're so blasé about it. Oh yeah, whatever.
And that's the healthy end of the inappropriate responses. The people saying it was all made up and you're imagining it, or you're a liar, or you're a faker, or this is propaganda. And I've got a couple in my inbox today, although it's not a moment for Idiot's Corner. They would be at the other extreme of the inappropriate responses. I don't know why that is, but well, at least we all clapped on Thursday nights, Angus, eh?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I don't know. I don't. Looking back, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but goodness me, it kind of didn't really focus us on the things that we should have been focusing on, did it? You take care, Angus, as well. I remember the last time you called now. The only reason I remember it is because of your habit of saying blah, 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 which I may have picked up on last time, but I certainly wasn't going to pick on this time, because that is how we get through the difficult stuff sometimes. Last word on this, I think, to Fred, who's in Newbury. Fred, what would you like to say?
Hi, first-time caller.
Welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Long-time listener. Just wanted to give you a perspective of an undertaker that worked all the way through it.
Okay.
And that's probably a slightly different image that you would have of an undertaker, in that all through it, all my job was going out along with others and picking up the deceased.
Yes.
From homes, hospitals, hospices, nursing homes, and we were doing that pre-COVID. So we were used to going out, collecting the deceased from literally all the way up to the Scottish borders and back to base.
Sure.
And when COVID started to hit, it was fascinating in some ways, because we went, for instance, to nursing homes when that scandal all came out about them being forced into nursing homes.
Sent back to nursing homes while infected.
Well, we were there.
Gosh.
And people were saying to us, well, we've just admitted 12 from the local authority.
Right.
And you could see it. And then you'd be back at that same place within a month, and there'd be 24 died within a week. Most of them from COVID.
Unbelievable.
So, well, we were then, and bearing in mind that once it started, we were working flat out for the 2.5 years. And we go into hospitals when it first started, very interesting. Nobody really knew how transmittable it was. So there was all sorts of precautions being taken at the hospital mortuaries. Some where we thought, well, that's a bit over the top.
Of course.
Others where we thought, well, that's a bit lax.
Yeah.
Because, we didn't really know. But that went on and it just increased. And then, of course, you had the pop-up mortuaries everywhere.
Yeah.
Where they were literally nearly all COVID cases. So we were going out, and I would say at the time there was probably 4 or 5 of us. Each had a van, and each of us were going out every day and bringing back 4 deceased. And probably at one stage, 20% of those were COVID cases. So, there was an awful lot.
Yeah.
And we had a whole fridge at the mortuary just dedicated to COVID cases.
And this wasn't really appreciated outside of your world, was it? I don't know why.
No.
So, I don't know whether the inquiry will provide some answers to these questions, but it was as if the healthcare professionals and undertakers like you were operating in a universe that was invisible to the rest of us, even as we understood the warnings and we had personal experience of suffering and death. The sheer scale of it still feels new to a lot of people listening today.
Yeah. No, it was interesting as well. So perhaps the wrong word to use.
I know what you mean.
We'd be going out And having already experienced that was our job. You know, we were going out into places, and you were driving through central London during lockdown, and it was a delight to actually be in London and not caught in all the traffic.
No, I understand what you mean. Like a Hollywood film, like The Day After, some sort of apocalypse. I've got to crack on, Fred, only because I'm already very late for this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 12 is the time. One of my favourite journalists over at the Times makes a point I've made a couple of times on the programme, but we don't know the answer to it. So a complete change of pace now. If this were an Etch-a-Sketch, lots of love to all the people getting in touch about the conversation we were having in the last hour. And again, I'm pretty confident I can speak for many people listening when I say lots of love to you. And I don't know what the way forward is on keeping those flames alive, as it were, of the trauma. But amazing how many of the people we spoke to who were working as healthcare professionals during the COVID period are no longer. And I thought Gus put it best. That was 2.5 years. It was equivalent to 10 or 15 years in normal times. It's like dog years, isn't it? COVID years. Like 5 normal years. And you get that. So you're much more likely to retire having gone through that if you're in that kind of zone, if you're in that age range, than you would be if you weren't. And age ranges play a small part in the next conversation that we're going to have. So Keir Starmer tweeted on Wednesday that here, I'll read it to you in full. There's a photograph of him with Ursula von der Leyen. And he wrote, I want to reset. It's quite a soft focus photograph. It looks like there might have been a little bit of Vaseline on the lens, to make it look very romantic. I want to reset our relationship, he wrote, with the EU and make Brexit work for the British people. Looking forward to visiting Brussels next week to start discussions with von der Leyen. And I haven't got it in front of me, but she replied in a similarly upbeat vein. She, of course, is the president of the EU Commission, who is shaking hands like it's going out of fashion this week. In fact, here is her response to Keir Starmer. Dear Keir Starmer, she wrote, good to see you in the margins of the UN General Assembly. I don't think that's a dig. I don't think she's suggesting we have been marginalised. I think that she just means it was a meeting outside of the scheduled formal array. At least I bloody hope so. Otherwise, she's having a swing at our lad. Looking forward to welcoming you at the EU Commission in Brussels next week to discuss the reset of EU-UK relations. So how lovely. But as Oliver Cam points out, this doesn't make any sense from the British perspective. He wrote yesterday, or late on Wednesday, Brexit cannot, quote, work for the British people, and it's dishonest or dogmatic to suppose otherwise. The most that can be achieved is to mitigate the damage. Something that has been true since Theresa May was Prime Minister. But Theresa May was the only Prime Minister, and I don't know about Rishi Sunak. I don't know whether by the time he got into Downing Street he had realised this, or whether he was still chugging the Kool-Aid, or whether there was something in it for people like him that is obviously not going to be of benefit to people like you and me. But this has been true since Theresa May got into Downing Street. The only thing you can achieve is to mitigate the damage. She understood that. Her tragedy, her curse, in many ways, was that she could never say it out loud. She could never say out loud, my job is to make the damage as low as possible. My job is to reduce the damage as much as I possibly can. She had to, by dint of the party she was leading and the country she was in, she had to pretend that it was all a brilliant idea. She'd been wrong to resist it, and here she was to deliver all the genius unicorns that were about to be delivered. So this is a great point from the journalist, author and linguist Oliver Cam, who writes, I don't understand why Labour won't say this when most people, especially the young, increasingly recognise it. In some ways, the same is true of economic growth. Keir Starmer keeps talking about economic growth, and yet the cessation of completely free trade with our closest geographical partners, and indeed the largest single market in the world, is a huge obstacle to growth. Growth is looking good. Compared to where we were at the beginning of the year. The OECD's revisions put the UK in... Growth is a tricky measure, because if you're absolutely rubbish on Monday and things start looking up on Tuesday, your growth is going to be higher than people who are doing great on Monday and continue to do great on Tuesday. Do you see what I mean? The starting point is relevant to growth. But an improvement in the OECD forecast can only ever be good news. Of course, people ignore OECD forecasts sometimes when they don't like what they say, and then shout them from the rooftops when they do. The point that everybody can agree on is that growth would be better if we were still in the biggest single market in the world. There is no real argument against that. So there's two things going on here. The first is on growth, and the second is on making Brexit work for the British people without admitting that the job is simply to mitigate the damage. And Oliver Cam writes, I don't understand why Labour won't say this when most people, especially the young, increasingly recognise it. What is your answer to that question? And I don't want to be strict. I don't want to be bossy, rather. I may well reserve the right to be strict, but I don't want to be bossy. I don't want you to ring me to agree with Oliver Cam and myself that this is stupid, that the most that can be achieved is to mitigate the damage. That's just a given, right? The single biggest thing you can do when you punch a hole in the side of your own ship, or you punch a hole in the side of your own boat, the single best thing you can do is try to plug as much of the hole as you can to minimise the amount of water coming on board. It's not the best analogy I've ever shared with you, but that's the point. It's about damage mitigation, damage limitation. We have a Prime Minister now who has been absolutely crystal clear about his understanding of this very simple fact. Brexit was a stupid thing to do, and the job of any government now is to limit the damage up to and including the point where you can begin to talk about reversing it, which I don't think you can do yet, although good luck to everybody on the National Rejoin March in London tomorrow. Just Google that phrase if you want to find out about getting involved or joining in. But I don't understand it either, and I'm James O-Brexit. Why won't Labour say... So what I'm being bossy on or strict on is that I want you to answer this question, not to tell me your thoughts on Brexit or Keir Starmer or Oliver Cam. Why won't Labour say that the best you can hope for with Brexit is to mitigate the damage it is doing when everybody, honest, especially young people, know that to be true? Okay? Why? Why now can't he say, my job is to limit the damage being done? Nobody's claiming it's gone well. Nobody's claiming it was a good thing. I think, is it Farage supposed to have left the country? He said he'd leave the country if it failed, and he described it as having failed. So I don't think there is a constituency of people out there who are worried about betrayal or anything like that. And so here's the bit I don't get. You can categorically rule out reversal or rejoining, right? He can categorically say, look, we're never going to rejoin. My job now is to make the best of a bad lot. And I don't understand why he doesn't do that. And I want you to tell me. And this is a wide open goal, actually. 0345 6060 973. I'll take anything you've got. Why won't he say, I understand the reasoning behind saying we're never going to rejoin, or he said we're never going to rejoin in my lifetime. So you can say on the one hand, we are never going to rejoin. The decision has been made, the decision has been taken. That's in your left hand. In your right hand, my job now is to make the best of it, with the admission that the best of it involves mitigating the damage. Why? Why won't the Labour leader, why won't the Prime Minister of this country tell the truth about the single, if you like, biggest issue holding back the growth that he consistently talks about, and indeed hindering the likelihood of a meaningful reset with the European Union? Why won't Keir Starmer in power admit what he was adamant about in opposition, or at least was adamant about before becoming leader of the Labour Party, which is that Brexit is something very, very silly, and the best you can hope for as a British politician is to minimise the damage that it does. All right? The number you need is 0345 6060 973. Come at it in whatever way you want. What is he worried about? Who is he worried about? And who does this please? Who does this work with? The rest of us sit here and go, this just doesn't make any sense. Everybody knows that your job is to limit the damage being done. So why won't you just come out and say that? Otherwise, you suffer from all the other problems that previous prime ministers have suffered from, which is the delivery of unreasonable expectations. Keir Starmer giving the impression that he can deliver something big and shiny. He can't. All he can do is nibble away at the edges of the damage in the hope of reducing it. So why won't he come out and say that? Listen, I could be wrong. Maybe you think there is something big and shiny that he could deliver tomorrow. I'd be surprised, A, if I was wrong, and B, if you could describe what that big shiny thing is. But why would he? Because that's what he's doing. He's still creating the mythology of expectation. Still creating the idea that there's some big present he can deliver, like an enormous teddy bear at the fun fair. He's lobbing his darts at the playing cards stuck on the board and thinking he's going to win an enormous teddy bear, or making his kids think he's going to win an enormous teddy bear when everybody knows he's not. He can't. So what is the reasoning behind Keir Starmer's refusal to state the bleeding obvious about the European Union relations, about Brexit? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It goes in both directions at the moment. There used to be a moment where I could barely say the word Brexit without the switchboard exploding. In subsequent years, as it kind of went, as it went off the boil a bit, while people crossed their fingers and hoped that Boris Johnson's farrago of lies and nonsenses wouldn't turn out to be quite as heinous as it turned out to be. Then there was no appetite for talking about it. And then the appetite came back. And the only people now who don't want to talk about Brexit are generally the people who told us it was all going to be a brilliant idea, because, you know, that people don't like having their faces rubbed in the evidence of their own stupidity. But if you are patriotic, if the future of the country is something that matters to you, this is one of the very big issues that needs to be addressed by government, by prime ministers, and he won't address it. Talking about reset, talking about discussions, a reset of our relationship with the EU. Make Brexit work for the British people. Why won't he tell the truth? 0345 6060 973. It's 12:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 12 is the time. The story is in the news. Keir Starmer is going to the meeting of the European Commission next week in order to, in his own words, reset the relationship. So I appreciate that a lot of people who voted for it and are now deeply embarrassed by their own gullibility are desperate for the conversation never to be had. But this is a conversation about what our Prime Minister is doing and saying. An awful lot of the news, particularly the kind of news we cover, is going to be about the things that the Prime Minister is doing and saying. And he is saying that he's looking forward to his trip to Brussels in order to reset the relationship between the UK and the EU. I don't even know what that means. That could be another question if you want to answer it. But I'm drawn to the question of why he claims that he can make it work for the British people when everybody who understands anything knows that's nonsense. So why won't Keir Starmer say that his job is to limit the damage when everybody paying attention knows that that is the case? And I like phone-ins about Brexit where I don't know the answer. I mean, we never used to have them. We've had two now in the last 3 weeks. I don't know the answer to this question. Why is he now? He's in power. He's over the line. The Ming vase has been safely delivered to the other side of the ice rink so he can start telling the truth about one of the biggest issues of our age. But he won't. He's just telling different flavoured lies from all the Tories that went before him. Julian is in Marlow. Julian, what's going on?
Good afternoon, James. I think it's Keir is plotting the path of least resistance. If he starts questioning the whole Brexit thing, it gives a totemic...
Well, that's a good word.
Thank you. I thought of it as I was on the call with your producer.
Nice.
A totemic emblem for the disaffected right, the conservative...
As in to take your language to its natural conclusion, as in a totem pole for them to all dance around.
There you go. Yeah. Or, let's make it British. So a maypole around which to dance.
Perfect, yes.
For both the Conservatives and the Reform Party. Now, Labour won the election.
Does it, though? Just because I know you're right up until recently. We're not going to open that Pandora's box because all the liars and the nativist weirdos will make capital from it. But if he says my job is to limit the damage being done, you would have to argue that there is no damage being done. And I'm not sure that even even Farage has admitted that it's all gone belly up.
If you look at the calibre of the candidates representing or in the running to represent the Conservative Party,
yes.
you can't exactly call them level-headed.
No, that's very true.
They're not a safe pair of hands. Theresa May, for all her faults, was, shall we say, more approaching the traditional Conservative values, shall we say. There were faults and deviations from that route, but generally represented the traditional Conservative values. But after her, it's been a totally other type of candidate, of leader. Very much the...
I see. So they would say things that were ridiculous and untrue in order to... But Keir Starmer doesn't seem that worried about... I don't think he's even that worried about some of the coverage of the largesse he's been receiving from...
Agreed. But right now, those are small issues. I mean, I
don't need to do this, he could say. Why would I do this now?
It's small issues. It's small fry compared to the huge splinter in the Conservative eyes. So there's very little comparison. There will be comparison made because, of course, these people were going to go for whatever weakness they spot, whatever chink they see in the Labour armour. But handing them the denial or the outright refusal or trying to backtrack on Brexit might be something that is too large, too unifying.
But he can do both. He can say, we're not backtracking, we are not undoing, we are not rejoining. You can even mention the prominent Brexiters who said we'd never leave the single market or the customs union. There's loads of space between...
Okay, but if he says Brexit was a bad idea and we've got to undo it, it gives too much of a... I mean, these people...
But he's not even saying Brexit is going bad. Well, he is kind of saying it's going badly, but then he's buying into the myth that it could go measurably or considerably better.
And that's all that he can do, because anything that...
But I want him to do more than that, Julian.
Too loudly,
I want him to do more than that.
I know you do, and so do I. But tough luck, Jim. We're not in power.
Again. Here we go again, being taken for granted. It's out. But I don't. I mean, how many people are left? Let me just have. You might know the answer to this, but I'm also speaking to my colleagues. How many people are left in the Conservative leadership candidate battle?
Is it 4?
Well, who's the fourth? I've got Honest Bob, Badenoch, and Tugendhat. Who's the other one?
God knows, but some mad nutter.
Who is it? Don't say some mad nutter. Cleverly, there you go. Oh, yeah, fair enough.
Like I said.
Yeah, I take that back. Apologies. So any one of those would take up a kind of Daily Express flavoured cudgel and throw complete nonsense.
Absolutely, of course. Of all four of them, actually, James Cleverly is the least mad of them, but he's willing to do whatever he needs to in order to.
No, you're right. And okay, but I mean, but again, I would begin to argue now, particularly with the length of Parliament ahead of us, I'd begin to argue, he doesn't really need to worry about any of that, especially if he delivers on it. He says, look, my job is to mitigate the damage, and then he does something that mitigates the damage, and then announces, look, I've mitigated some of the damage. That's a good thing. If you fix damage, then your opponents can't deny that the damage didn't exist. If you plug a hole in the side of a boat, they can't come out and say there was never any hole in the side of this boat. I suppose Farage could, and would indeed, but not those four. I don't know. We were thinking the other contender for this hour was a great comment in one newspaper article about the imminent Tory party conference, which just said nobody sane is going. No, the idea that the Tory party, and of course if they're chasing the insane, then they've already been beaten to it. Nobody sane is going to the Tory party conference, which plays a little into Julian's analysis. Toby is in Bristol. Toby, what's going on?
Our ex-MP, Sam Debenham, who I had a long conversation just before the election, put it very nicely.
I'm living on a prayer. Ooh, Sangam Debonnet. Sorry, carry on.
She very nicely, I thought, put it, that she's described Brexit as being a bit like a really messy divorce.
Yes.
And that whatever position that we're in, you don't jump straight back into bed with your ex-partner. You take them out for coffee and you schmooze them a bit. And I think that Starmer is in this really unenviable position of whatever he does.
I like this analogy, but to pick a hole in it early before I allow you to explore it further, he's not saying that divorce was bad or difficult.
I don't think he's got any choice.
He's going to make the best of my divorce.
No, he can't. Anything that he says will be interpreted as being wrong, and therefore I think this is a second-term issue that he will come back to. At the moment, there are so many awful things that he's having to try and rectify that the Brexit issue, as we all know, sucks the oxygen out of every other discussion.
Yeah, but at some point it won't, and it's up to him. What is he, a leader or a follower? Does he not create the environment in which it doesn't suck everything out of
I wish that he would. I stood in front of him at the marches about the second referendum, and I think that he's just a pragmatist, and he's going, we've got too much going on, and therefore we're going to address this at a later date. That's what my hope is. I would go back in tomorrow. I absolutely think it's farcical, the situation we've got ourselves in. But there are so many other issues going on. How many issues can you try and deal with?
I don't know. I think everyone's a bit gaslit. I think you're all a bit gaslit. I think that he could say this. Who's going to come for him if he just says, look, it's clearly not gone very well. My job is to fix some of the damage that it's done. How big is the difference?
I think what you said is we are just being ignored, though. I think that we've been banging our heads against this door for 8 years now, and it has got to the point where you have to just say, well, okay, you fix it, but how much energy mind can you pour into it? Because the people will not shift. And if the now Prime Minister says, I'm not shifting on this, absolutely we carry on fighting to rejoin, but he's just not going to shift until he is ready or even willing to deal with it, because a lot of the places that voted Labour this time are wafer thin,
a loveless landslide. But I don't know. I mean, but maybe the problem is that they don't ring me anymore. They don't really even text me, to be honest, except from the really lunatic fringes. But who are the people that would be cross if Keir Starmer stood up and said, look, this isn't going very well? Their own people have said it isn't going very well. People who claim that there's been a betrayal, or people who claim that the Tories have muffed it up, that there was some wonderful Mandalay that could have been delivered but wasn't because of the people that you put all your faith in turning out not to deserve your faith, the Boris Johnsons of this world. Keir Starmer and my two callers so far kind of hinge everything upon the existence of a constituency of people that would be outraged if Keir Starmer came out and said, my job is to limit and start undoing some of the damage of Brexit. And I don't know that... I guess the newspapers probably would as well, but normal people? Really? Who's going to be cross about this? A statement of the bleeding obvious. So why is Keir Starmer not telling the truth about Brexit? Given that we knew Boris Johnson would lie about Brexit, we knew that Theresa May couldn't tell the truth about Brexit, we knew that Liz Truss couldn't tie her own shoelaces, politically speaking, and we knew that Rishi Sunak was kind of hoping that it would stay out of the political space because it was evidence of his poor judgment or of the failure of his party to deliver the unicorn. So the last four prime ministers all had reasons not to tell the truth about Brexit. What is Keir Starmer's reason for not telling the truth about Brexit? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Jenny Barsby has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Your job is, if someone tells you that it's raining, your job is, as a journalist, to stick your head out the window and see if it gets wet or not. What is the job of a Prime Minister? If someone says it's raining, his job is to stick his head out the window and tell us whether or not it's got wet or not. So I think one of the answers to this, and it's probably the answer I hate the most, because it means I'm in some ways wasted my time asking the question. But the answer could be because nobody cares. Only freaks like you care. Why will Keir Starmer not tell the truth about Brexit? Asks Oliver Cam, the Times columnist. Why will he not admit, if you like, or acknowledge that the most that can be achieved is to mitigate the damage? Why does he keep promising that he will make it work for the British people? And the answer is that most people either don't know or don't accept the damage that's been done. You go to your supermarket and wonder why the shelves are not as bountiful as they used to be. You don't realise it's because of Brexit. You look at your cost of living basket and you know that things have gone up and you know about energy prices, but you don't realise that some of it is a consequence of Brexit. You look at all manner of impacts, local businesses that have gone bust or products that you can no longer buy. Certainly things that you can no longer get easily imported from the European Union. You just don't. I don't see Brexit. I don't hear Brexit. I don't feel Brexit. So maybe professional commentators particularly those of us who have had something of a field day with telling the truth about Brexit and being proved right about Brexit. Maybe we're the ones who care. And Keir Starmer oddly doesn't. What's he going to achieve by telling you the truth? I don't know. I do not know. 0345 6060 973. Everywhere you go. Everywhere you go. I'll stop singing now. That's not fair on anybody, is it? Going to make it better. Everywhere you go, there's evidence of it. It doesn't matter whether you're listening to Goldman Sachs or your friendly neighbourhood greengrocer. Everybody will tell you about the damage that's been done. And most people will tell you there's not a great deal Keir Starmer can do about it except promise to start reducing or limiting the damage. So why won't he say so? And part of the answer might be that nobody cares. 12:36 is the time. Nick's in Reading. Nick, what do you think?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
Although I have, I've over the years, spoken to opposite numbers on 5 Live with that name dropping.
Okay, that's fine. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the big leagues, Nick. Welcome to the big leagues.
Yeah, it was a bit worth a promotion. But yeah, I think you can trace it all back to the 29. In my humble opinion, I can't say I don't know any more than you do. The rout Labour suffered in 2019, which was the Tories, pretty much with Dominic Cummings pulling the strings, became more of a single issue party than UKIP as was.
Yes.
Get Brexit done.
Yeah.
And then after he became the leader, he suffered a first setback. If you remember the Hartlepool by-election, again, that was another red wall seat that turned blue.
Yes.
And he's obviously, I think your researcher said, mentioned the proverbial Ming vase.
Yes.
And that's what he is to this day. He's still being absolutely circumspect because many of the traditional Labour voters in those red wall seats in the North and the Midlands view him as the archetypal North London liberal elite Remainer, and he's doing his absolute darndest.
But he was that when he got elected, though. So he's got the Ming vase has been delivered.
He has.
The Ming vase is on the other side of the ice rink. It's happened now. And also, the people who fell for Johnson's nonsenses in 2019 proved in 2024 that they no longer believed in Johnson's nonsense.
Oh, agreed. But I think it's his own perception, and I can't say it's right. I'm only surmising like the rest.
No, that's what we're all doing. But I can surmise about your surmising. I think we might be overthinking it. It might just be the case. What would he win? What would he gain by doing it?
And I think that also is for all the electoral and for all the amount of seats that the boots on the other foot in terms of capitulation at the ballot box in the last election.
Yes,
he's fully aware that it's still a very fragile victory. A lot of it was aided and abetted by the Tories' own self-implosion.
Yes, I mean the loveless landslide that John Sopel has described is a beautiful turn of phrase. But that depends upon that depends upon the existence of a huge number of people who would still be perturbed by the truth. They rejected reality in 2016. They doubled down on the rejection of reality in 2019, as you remind us. What did they do in 2024? They gave a very wide but shallow majority to Keir Starmer. Would they really take their votes home if he started actually describing reality rather than pandering to the continuing misrepresentation of reality? I genuinely don't know. And I may never know until it actually happens, because the days of people ringing me to tell me that everything was going to be brilliant and they couldn't wait to get rid of all those pesky laws and there'd be no immigration or there'd be no NHS waiting lists, all of that, those days sadly are over. I kind of miss them sometimes, alongside the degree of pleasure in being proved absolutely right. I sometimes worry about those people and what happened to them. What do you do now? What are you getting cross about now? That it's been shown you were completely wrong about everything to do with Brexit. Would you get cross with Keir Starmer if he started telling you the truth about Brexit? The calculation in the Labour Party leadership seems to be that, yes, you would still get cross. Thank you, Nick. Max is in Crouch End. Max, what would you like to say?
I think that... hi, James.
Hello,
I think
Max.
that... he's quite reluctant and has been over the years that he's been a politician to directly challenge right-wing ideology, including Brexit. He instead prefers to...
He did as shadow Brexit secretary. He was quite outspoken.
He possibly was as Brexit. Yes, that's maybe true. But since becoming the Labour leader, he has not done that. He has rarely gone out and said Brexit is wrong, or really any kind of right-wing ideological thing.
Yes.
Instead, if you look at the way he criticised the Tories, for instance, he would say incompetent, sleazy, whatever it is. He would never say, I disagree profoundly with your ideology. And I think all of that is because he is scared of attack from the right-wing media. And I think that continues to be true. And so this is his approach. And I think the other point is that he can then do this for a few years, negotiations with the EU, and then say, okay, well, look, I tried. And then maybe after demonstrating that he's at least tried, the media will be a bit softer and he can say, well, maybe we should consider other options.
See, I think, I don't know. I mean, everything changes, doesn't it, with every passing day? And this is still a very new administration. But I don't think he suffers from that kind of front-pager phobia. Oddly, his Tory predecessors did. We know that Johnson was only really interested in the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail response to his announcements. He didn't really care whether or not it caused more death, less death, or no death, lots of death. Just see, do the Telegraph like it? Do the Mail like it? I don't see Starmer in any other area really worrying too much about what the right-wing media is doing. I mean, if he was that worried about it, then he'd never go to another football match again, would he?
Well, I think your previous caller was onto something as well about the Red Wall and those being important areas for Labour. And maybe that's it as well. Maybe he doesn't want to lose those areas and they are more committed to Brexit than we are.
I don't think they are, though. I don't think they are. How can they be? What are they committed to? Let's imagine that they still rang me and I said, what are you committed to? What are you terrified of? What did you gain?
Yeah.
That you're terrified of losing. What would they say?
They're wrong, though, often.
No, that's true. Someone should write a book about it. Thank you, Max. That is a question, isn't it? What did you get? What did you win that you don't want to give back? Because that is the only way in which you can make sense logically. And Max is quite right that logic is sometimes a bit absent in these conversations. What did you win from Brexit? What did Brexit give you that you don't want to surrender? That could be the new version, if these people still rang me. That could be the new version of what law is it that you're most looking forward to not having to obey anymore? Do you remember when people used to say you could hear that little moment of realisation where they thought they suddenly realised? This happens to me, or happened past tense, to me in real life as well, including people I love, family members that voted for it. And you'd say, why? And you'd say, well, I want to make our own laws. And you'd say, because that was the phrase, I think, for the non-racists that really landed. And so you just say politely over the dinner table or in the pub, okay, that'd be good. What law? So either what law are you going to make, to which you can't answer immigration because then you become one of the nativist snarlers. So what law would you make? Or what law do you most look forward to not having to obey anymore? And when you do it in real life rather than the radio, you can watch the reaction on people's faces. So much identity was tied up in it all, wasn't it? That was something, again, the Remain side got wrong or didn't understand or failed to properly address. People had it as part of their identity. They had it as part of their self-image. They thought that it somehow, proved their patriotism or something like that. Brussels is our enemy. We've got to get away. Why? Because of the laws. What laws? And now the question would be, what benefits? What did you win that you are adamant you're never going to give up? And it has to be something we can see or count or smell. It can't be sovereignty, for example, because that's a nonsensical concept in the context of international relations. What did you win? What would they say? So who are these people that are terrified of Keir Starmer telling the truth about Brexit because it would take something away from them? Is it victory? They don't even seem to want the victory anymore because they're exactly the same people who don't want us to talk about it. Why are you still talking? I've just tuned in. He's talking about Brexit again. I'm tuning out. Although a special shout to the person who didn't check their predictive text and complained that I was banging on about Brecht. Which, it's not impossible that one day I'll come on air and bang on about Bertolt Brecht, but that day is not today. I could bang on about Samuel Beckett, who occupies a similar theatrical space, because the Waiting for Godot that I saw on Monday night was so extraordinary. But the people who don't want us to talk about it are the people who won. So it's not even that you'd have your victory taken away from you, because you're embarrassed now by the fact that you were on the winning side. So who is it? I don't know. It's 1:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Who gets this? How much attention were you paying at the time? How hardcore a fan are you of this programme? Right, ready? This is from Peter. The signs are still in the Dartford Tunnel, James. I'm so angry. Who knows what that means? Do you remember what that means? That was a moment, wasn't it? That was Rachel. That was Rachel Venables, formerly of this parish, now, of course, continuing to do first-class work at Sky News. But she got Rees-Mogg one-on-one and just asked him for some benefits. He'd published a list of 2,400 laws that they were going to rescind and repeal. Brexit laws, EU laws. So she said, could you mention one? Remember, this is the guy, this is the cheerleader-in-chief almost for the whole shebang. Being offered an opportunity to answer that question, I dare to possibly suggest that Rachel might have been a little bit inspired by me when she simply said, could you name one law that we are going to get rid of? And do you know what he said? He said that we could get rid of the funny numbers in the Dartford Tunnel. I think incorrectly, he was under the impression that EU regulations meant that you had to use metric measurements, despite the fact that our road signs are imperial, yards and miles on the road signs. In the Dartford Tunnel, it tells you how to get out of the tunnel in the event of your car breaking down or some other problem every 25 metres. And the man who would be Brexit minister or the minister for Brexit benefits, given an open goal to mention all the things that he wanted to get rid of, all he could come up with was signage in the Dartford Tunnel. If my memory serves, that had nothing to do with it anyway. And Peter tells us, and I have no reason to doubt him, they haven't even changed those signs. So even if you were a complete flump and you really did think that Jacob Rees-Mogg was speaking for you when he talked about funny numbers in the Dartford Tunnel, you didn't even get that. So the one thing he could mention when asked for benefits never happened. And yet Keir Starmer still feels handcuffed to the myths and the nonsense. 10 to 1 is the time. Janice is in Canterbury. Why, Janice? Why is he so frightened of the truth? If indeed frightened is the right word to use.
I'm not sure that the frightened is the right word, but I think he's probably very mindful of the wide but shallow coalition he's put together in terms of voters, and I think we're not at a point where he can just disregard that.
But what are they frightened of losing, those people?
Well, I think that's been rehearsed for years and years now. God knows, but I think that...
I don't think he does, actually. Apologies to,
I think
Hail Mary. I don't think he does, because he doesn't. Who knows? What is? So you say, because everyone keeps telling me about all these people.
I don't.
Go on.
Yeah, go on.
All these people who he doesn't want to spook, and I say, how would he spook them? By taking away their things. And I say, what things? And nobody knows. Nobody knows what things he can take.
I'm not sure. I think that some of them are still quite wedded to it, and I think that may be a mix of stubbornness and what have you, but I think time is on our side, and
yes.
and I think that because this is not a static thing, is it? He's not banging the tub against the EU. He's not coming up with cheap kind of nonsense about the EU. And I think...
No, but he has said things like, never in our lifetime. Never in my lifetime. Never in my lifetime is anything going to happen.
Well, people say a lot of things and things change. At the moment, we have left. I'm not sure that we could, at this moment, regain what we had with the EU. We lost.
No, but that involves telling the truth. He could say that. He could say, obviously, we'd be great if we could go back to what we had before, but we can't. So there's so many things he could tell the truth about.
He could, but we know that telling the truth doesn't always win the day.
Oh, I guess.
And it's about thinking. It's about thinking a bit smarter and not falling into the traps that are laid by the media, notwithstanding what you said, that Starmer is probably the least frightened of the Tory press.
Yeah, well, to be fair to Jeremy Corbyn, he didn't seem to be that worried about the Tory press either, but unfortunately the dynamics were different.
Well, he was a Brexiteer or elected.
Well, exactly.
I mean, I think.
Exactly.
But I think that Starmer is not going, and I think but there's, you see, on the other side there's the Lib Dems. I think they can hoover up even more votes from the Tories, and I think they probably can go a bit in a bit harder in terms of the need to rejoin.
I'm being a bit. You can't expect everything in day one. Then is what you're really saying. Is he's got plenty going on. He doesn't. What would he gain by coming out and saying, "Oh, what a terrible mess. My job is to minimise the mess. My job is to tidy up a bit." He comes out and says, "We need to reset the relationship with the EU." He manages to.
We do need to reset.
I know
it.
we need to reset it.
We urgently need to regain trust, and I don't think we're there at the moment. I mean, it was so bad when you think about the things that the British government did. It doesn't matter that they. It doesn't.
So that's
matter
his first job
they
is
were
to.
Tories.
Yeah.
They were the British government.
They were the British government. Yeah, you're right.
We burned them. We insulted them, and
compared them to
laughed
concentration camp guards, all sorts of things. And his job now is to say that you are now dealing with a sane and rational administration, not with a bunch of weirdos.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be an overnight thing, and we don't know what he says to them behind closed doors. He is a Remainer. Everyone knows that, and that's what the Tories.
I don't know if he is on that. That's why I like these conversations. Why I like listening to people like you on days like today. I don't know if he is. But what if he is such a pragmatist that he isn't anymore? What if this is something that he feels is over, that the ship has sailed? His job is to govern in the post-Brexit universe, and what is in the rearview mirror will stay in the rearview mirror. I'd find that unhappy. That's an unhappy prospect for me, but it might be the pragmatic one. Janice, thank you. In fact, it was to Brexit that John Sopel turned my attention when I interviewed him for this week's Full Disclosure to mark the publication of his new book, Strangeland, which looks at both sides of the Atlantic in many ways, probably because I've chronicled what was happening on this side so tirelessly. It's the reminders of what happened on January the 6th. It's the American angles that had my eyes on stalks. But this is him talking about coming back to Blighty after, I think, 14 years covering, that wasn't 14, 8 years covering the American beat for the BBC.
I think the first election I voted in, the 1979 election when Thatcher won after Labour were booted out of power after the winter of discontent, for the next 28 years, nearly 3 decades, I saw 3 prime ministers. I saw Thatcher, I saw Major, and I saw Blair. 1979 to 1997. And I came back from America in 2022 and we had 3 prime ministers in 1 year. And you just thought, what on earth has happened to our country? And it was like someone had set an exam question for the maths GCSE paper and had misprinted the equation that everyone had to work out, and there was no answer. And that felt to me what had happened with Brexit. Yes. That people had been set an equation for which there is no answer. And politics was struggling with it, and it came to kind of blow up and explode in 2022 when the ludicrous promises that had been made and had not been realised suddenly became the impossibility of it all. And so you were left with the boosterism, the deceit, then you're trying to massage the way Parliament works and you're proroguing it unlawfully, and it goes on, and it just went on and on and on. And this also the sense that there was impunity for the political leadership, that they could do what they liked. And I just thought, this is really dangerous moment. I thought I would never see anything that would rival the 6th of January 2021. And in 2022 in British politics, you thought, oh my God.
We're flirting with it.
We're flirting with it. And this is dangerous. And you know, and of course, you're right, James, in saying that at the BBC, I would not have been able to write this book.
Or say any of that.
Or say any of what...
certainly not open the book with a very cutting description of Brexit.
Yeah, and yet I felt that this was something that was profound, and
but also obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that...
To you?
It was obvious to me, and it just felt, wow, and I kind of worried about the way we were discussing it and the way we were framing it, and so... My love of the BBC is undimmed.
Yes, it is. And your respect and your loyalty to your colleagues as well.
Yeah, who I think do a fantastic job. But I think there are limitations over the language it can find to discuss some of the more domestic political difficulties. You know, if you're Jeremy Bowen or you were John Sopel when he was in Washington, you can call it pretty much. I think there are much more constraints because of the relationship between government and the BBC, the funding model, the fact that, you know, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, That was a huge amount of bullying that was going on. And so, it's always difficult to measure exactly what the effect of the bullying is. But I sometimes felt that it was, okay, let's not go near that subject. Like Brexit, you don't hear that much about Brexit. Still.
Well, you do on this show. Although not quite sure for how much longer. John Sopel there talking about his new book, Strangeland, which comes with my hearty recommendation. No one got me on to plug my book when my book came out, did they? You didn't get me on.
Are you kidding me?
You did not. Did you get me on?
Don't you remember the interview we did?
Did we do an interview?
No, we didn't.
No, exactly.
Listen, you did enough all on your own, mate.
What are you talking about? This is outrageous. This is 2-tier LBC. One rule for Sopel, another rule for me.
I wanted to come to that event where you talked to John about his book.
Oh, it was nice. It was in your manor.
It was 5 minutes from my house, but I wasn't there. I was away for the weekend.
I could have got you on the list. I'd have sorted you, actually.
Thanks, darling.
All right, next time. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.